She was worth $4 billion. He drove a moving truck for a living. She handed him a contract that would change everything. He almost threw it back in her face. "Marry me for 6 months," the billionaire said, standing in her dead father's mansion, surrounded by boxes he was paid to pack. "I'll give you enough money that your daughter never struggles again." Ethan Walker stared at the woman who could buy his entire neighborhood and never feel it. He should have said no. He didn't. Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The morning Ethan Walker's life changed forever. He was 45 minutes behind schedule. His left tail light was out, and his daughter had cried herself back to sleep at 5 a.m. because she'd had the dream again. The one about her mother. He stood in the kitchen of their rental house in Millbrook, New Jersey, drinking coffee that had gone cold before he'd remembered to drink it, staring at the crayon drawing Lily had taped to the refrigerator 2 weeks ago. A woman with yellow hair. A man in a blue shirt. A little girl between them, arms stretched wide, touching both of them at once. Lily had written "family" underneath it in her careful, uneven handwriting. She was 6 years old and still working out where the letters went. Ethan looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he poured the cold coffee down the sink, picked up his keys, and went to work. Walker & Sons Moving Company was neither much of a company nor did it have multiple sons. It was Ethan and 2 guys. Marcus, who was 24 and strong as a draft horse, and Pete, who was 51 and moved slower than he used to but knew how to pack a piano better than anyone Ethan had ever met. The "and Sons" part of the name had been his father's optimism, back when Ethan was 16 and helping load furniture on weekends, back when his father believed this little operation was going to be something. His father had been dead for 8 years. The company was still small, and Ethan had stopped correcting people when they asked if he had brothers in the business. "Big job today," Marcus said when Ethan pulled up to the yard. He was leaning against the truck, eating a breakfast sandwich with the wrapper barely off. "The Sterling estate." "I know." Ethan had read the intake form 3 times. Sterling, as in Richard Sterling, who had died 6 weeks ago and whose obituary had run in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and probably every business publication in the country. As in the man who had built Sterling Capital from a regional firm into a global investment corporation worth, depending on which article you read, somewhere between $6 and $9 billion. "You nervous?" Marcus asked. "About packing boxes?" "About packing rich people's boxes." "Rich people's stuff breaks the same way," Ethan said. "Let's go." The Sterling estate sat on 11 acres in Westfield. Ethan had driven past the gates before. Most people in the county knew the property, the way you know certain landmarks without ever expecting to go through them. Iron gates. A driveway that curved out of sight. Trees so old and thick they made the whole place feel like it belonged to a different century. A lawyer named Gerald Holt met them at the front door. He was thin, precise, and had the careful energy of a man who billed by the hour and resented every minute of small talk. "The family has requested that all items be cataloged before packing," he said, handing Ethan a clipboard with a 12-page itemization list. "Nothing leaves the property without being checked against this list. Some items are being transferred to storage. Others are being donated to specific institutions. The labels will indicate which is which." "Got it," Ethan said. "Miss Sterling may be on the premises. She's requested that you proceed with the work regardless of her presence. She won't be in your way." "Okay." Holt looked at him for a moment as if expecting something else, then nodded once and walked away. Marcus leaned over and looked at the itemization list. "There are antiques on here with insurance values in 6 figures. "Don't drop anything," Ethan said. "Bro, don't say that." They started in the library. It was a real library, not a room with a bookshelf, but a full 2-story room with a rolling ladder on a track, floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a reading chair positioned near the window that still held the shape of the man who'd spent years sitting in it. There were thousands of books, first editions behind glass, framed letters, a desk that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. Pete whistled softly when they walked in. "Take your time," Ethan said. "Careful with everything." He started at the far end of the room, checking titles against the list, beginning to wrap the more fragile items in tissue. The work was methodical and quiet. which he liked. Moving work at its best was like that. A puzzle of space and weight and care. The satisfaction of protecting something valuable enough to matter to someone. He was halfway up the rolling ladder, reaching for a framed document on the upper shelf, when he heard footsteps behind him. That's his Princeton diploma. He turned too fast. The ladder swayed. He grabbed the shelf with one hand and managed not to fall, but the diploma tilted and he caught it with his other hand in a motion that was more luck than skill. When he looked down, a woman was standing at the base of the ladder, watching him with an expression that was difficult to read. Dark hair pulled back. No makeup or very little. She was wearing a plain black sweater and dark jeans, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked so ordinary that he forgot who she was. Then he remembered the name on the contract. Victoria Sterling. "Sorry," he said. "You startled me." "You almost dropped it." "But I didn't." Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile. "No, you didn't." She paused. "Can you hand it down?" He climbed down carefully, holding the diploma, and passed it to her. She took it with both hands and looked at it for a moment, not reading it, just holding it. Her father's name in the elaborate script of an old institution, Richard James Sterling. "He was proud of this," she said. "More than anything else he ever achieved, I think. He grew up without much. The first person in his family to finish college." She said it matter-of-factly, without sentiment, the way people talk about things they've carried long enough that the weight has become normal. "Where should I put it?" Ethan asked. "Storage, box 12. She set it carefully on the table and looked up at him. "You're the owner? Walker?" "Yes. Gerald said you came recommended, that you handled the Harrington estate last spring." "We did." "They had a Steinway." "We got it out without a scratch." She studied him for a moment in the direct, unhurried way of someone who was used to evaluating people quickly and accurately. It didn't make him uncomfortable exactly, just aware. "Good," she said, and walked out of the library. They worked through the morning. Victoria Sterling moved through the house at unpredictable intervals, sometimes sitting in a room while they worked around her, sometimes disappearing for an hour, sometimes standing in a doorway watching them pack her father's things with that same unreadable look. At noon, a woman came in with sandwiches and left them in the kitchen without a word. Ethan, Marcus, and Pete ate standing up. "She's watching us," Marcus said quietly. "She's watching her father's stuff," Ethan said. "Same difference." Pete unwrapped his sandwich. "Woman like that loses her father. She's also losing everything that reminds her of him. We're packing away her whole past. Of course she's watching." They were quiet for a minute. "That's surprisingly perceptive," Marcus said. "I'm 51, Pete said. "I've moved a lot of grieving families." The afternoon brought them to the study on the second floor. It was smaller than the library, more personal. A room that felt like it had actually been used rather than displayed. The desk here was scratched at one corner. There were sticky notes still on the monitor, handwritten. A coffee ring on the desk pad that hadn't been cleaned up, probably because no one had the heart to erase it. Ethan was cataloging the contents of the desk when Victoria came in again. "The top drawer is locked," she said. "I have the key." She set a small brass key on the desk. "There's a letter in there, in a sealed envelope. It has my name on it. I'd appreciate it if you could set it aside rather than packing it." "Of course." He unlocked the drawer. Inside, along with some pens and a small notebook, was an envelope. "Victoria," written in the cramped, deliberate handwriting of an old man who'd spent his life writing things by hand. He set it on the corner of the desk and relocked the drawer. Victoria picked up the envelope. Didn't open it, just held it, standing by the window, and Ethan could see in her profile the kind of stillness that happens when someone is working very hard not to feel something in front of a stranger. He went back to cataloging. After a moment, she said, "Did you know about the will clause?" He looked up. "Pardon?" "My father's will, there's a provision in it." She said it like she was talking about someone else's problem. "I have 60 days to be married or control of Sterling Capital transfers to the board of directors. The foundation, the charitable foundation my father spent 30 years building, goes under board oversight, which means it effectively gets dismantled over time in favor of profit." Ethan wasn't sure what he was supposed to say to that. "I'm sorry." I have 41 days left. She turned from the window and looked at him directly. I've been watching you work today. Something in the way she said it made him set down the clipboard. You're careful, she said. You're not rough with things. Most people are rougher than they think they are with things that aren't theirs. She paused. You have a daughter. How do you know that? I Googled your company before the job. There was a profile in a local paper, Small Business Spotlight. Your daughter was in the photo. She said it without apology, just information. How old is she? 6. What's her name? He hesitated. This was a strange conversation. Lily. Victoria nodded slowly. Then she said, I want to make you a proposition. And I want you to hear the whole thing before you respond. He heard the whole thing. It took about 15 minutes. Victoria spoke the way Ethan imagined she ran meetings, clearly without wasted words, covering every variable she'd already thought through. She'd clearly been building this in her head for a while. The arrangement, a legal marriage, on paper and in public, sufficient to satisfy the terms of the will. 6 months, during which time she would handle the corporate politics, and he would need only to attend certain events and maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. At the end of 6 months, a quiet and amicable divorce, framed publicly as an incompatibility rather than a failure. The payment, $500,000, transferred to his account in installments, a third at signing, a third at the 3-month mark, a third upon dissolution of the marriage. $500,000, Ethan repeated. Yes. For 6 months. Correct. He looked at her. She was watching him with that same direct, evaluating look. No embarrassment, no uncertainty, like she was proposing a business acquisition and waiting to see if the numbers made sense to the other party. Why me? He asked. Because I've been watching you handle my father's belongings all day, and you're careful, and you're honest, and I can tell that from the way you work, because you're not connected to my world, which means there are no conflicts of interest and no power dynamics to navigate. Because you have a daughter who needs security, which means you have a reason to take this seriously and a reason to keep the agreement. She paused. And because I have 41 days and I've run out of better options. That last part was so bluntly honest that it almost surprised a laugh out of him. I'm not a solution, he said. No, you're a person who has something I need, time. And I have something you need, money. It's a transaction. I'm not pretending otherwise. I have a daughter, he said again, differently this time. Not a fact, a complication. I know. I can't just... She'd have to know something. She'd notice. Children adapt, Victoria said, and I'm not asking you to lie to her about anything important. We'd figure out the details. We'd figure out the details. He repeated it slowly. You know, when you say it like that, it almost sounds simple. It's not simple. I know it's not simple. Something shifted in her voice. Not softer exactly, but less controlled. Mr. Walker, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to pretend to. I'm asking you to give me enough time to protect what my father spent his life building. And I'm offering you enough money to change your daughter's life. That's the whole transaction. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Through the window he could see the grounds. Manicured, perfect, a landscape that cost more to maintain per year than he made running the company. Marcus and Pete were loading the van in the driveway below, moving carefully, doing their jobs. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. She reached into the pocket of her jeans and handed him a card. Just a number, no name. Think about it tonight. I need an answer within 48 hours. He took the card. She picked up her father's letter from the desk corner and walked out without another word. He thought about it that night. He thought about it while he picked Lily up from his neighbor Mrs. Caruso, who watched Lily after school and sometimes made them dinner when she had extra. He thought about it while Lily told him about her day. Something about a project on butterflies. Something about a girl named Sophia who had the same sneakers as her. He thought about it while he made spaghetti and burned the garlic a little, and Lily said, "Daddy, it smells funny." And he said, "It's supposed to smell like that." And she made a face that looked exactly like her mother. That was the thing about Lily. She was the person he loved most in the world. And sometimes, when the light hit her a certain way or she made that face, she was also the person who made grief feel like a fresh wound. Sarah had been gone for 2 years. A car accident on a November afternoon, a driver who ran a red light, a moment that divided his life into before and after. Lily had been 4, old enough to remember her mother, young enough that the memories were already blurring at the edges. They didn't have much. The company paid the bills, and sometimes more than the bills, but not much more. Ethan had a savings account that he was disciplined about, and a college fund for Lily that he put $50 into every month because 50 was what he could manage. He thought about the number 500,000 and what it would mean. It would mean Lily's college was guaranteed. It would mean he could buy the truck outright instead of leasing it. It would mean that when the furnace broke in February, and it would break again, it always did, he wouldn't have to choose between fixing it and making rent. It would mean he could stop doing the math in his head every night. After Lily was asleep, he sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and her crayon drawing on the refrigerator in front of him. Family. He picked up his phone and stared at the number on the card for a long time. Then he called it. "I have conditions," he said when she picked up. A beat of silence. "All right. Lily comes first, always. If anything about this arrangement puts her in a difficult position emotionally or practically, I pull out. We'd need a clause for that." "Agreed. She's told the truth that you and I are friends, that you're someone I'm spending time with. I don't want to build her a fiction that's going to collapse on her." "That's sensible," Victoria said, "and honestly, preferable. A child who knows there are rules is less of a liability than one who's been misled." He wasn't sure how he felt about Lily being described as a potential liability, but he let it go. "I keep working," he said. "The company doesn't stop. I'm not going to be a kept man." "I have no interest in keeping you. You'd be expected at certain events, maybe 2 or 3 per month, weekends occasionally. We'd agree on the schedule." "Where do we live?" A pause. "I have a house in Princeton, 4 bedrooms. Enough space." "You want us to move in with you?" "For appearances, yes. It would need to look like an actual marriage. 2 people living in separate houses doesn't accomplish that." He rubbed his face. "That's a big ask." "I know. Lily's at a school. She has a routine. Mrs. Caruso. Princeton has schools. We can find her something equivalent or better. I'll cover the enrollment and any associated costs." "You'll cover." He said it flatly. "Yes." No apology in her voice, but something careful. "I'm aware that sounds dismissive of what you've built. I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying the logistics are solvable, and I'll handle the costs." "You're very efficient," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Mr. Walker?" "Ethan. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm not buying you. This is a contract between 2 adults who are getting something they need from each other. When it's over, you go back to your life with more resources than you had. Nothing about who you are has to change." He looked at the drawing again. "Can I meet with you tomorrow?" he said. "In person. I want to look you in the eye when we go over the contract." "Of course. Where?" He thought about this. Not her office. Too much on her territory. Not his house. Too personal. "There's a diner on Route 22, Millbrook, Annie's. You know how to find it?" Another pause, slightly longer. He wondered if Victoria Sterling had ever been to a diner on Route 22. "I'll find it," she said. 9 o'clock. I'll be there." She was there at 5 minutes to 9, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee she'd ordered but not touched, wearing a blazer and dark pants that somehow looked out of place and also completely natural at the same time, like someone who had learned how to be comfortable anywhere, or was working at it. Ethan slid into the booth across from her and put his hands on the table. "You brought a lawyer," he said. It wasn't a question. There was a man in a gray suit 2 tables over, watching them with the careful non-expression of someone pretending not to watch. "Habit," Victoria said. "He won't come to the table unless you want him to." "I don't." "Then he won't." The waitress came. Ethan ordered coffee and eggs. Victoria ordered nothing additional, then seemed to reconsider and asked for toast. When the waitress left, Victoria pulled a folder from her bag and set it on the table. "Draft contract, Gerald prepared it. All the terms we discussed, plus a few additional protections for both parties." "Can I read it before you explain it?" She pushed it across. Of course. He read. It took 20 minutes. She drank her coffee and ate her toast and didn't rush him. The contract was thorough. Payment structure, timeline, clauses covering his withdrawal conditions, a non-disclosure agreement that ran both directions. She couldn't speak about the arrangement, and neither could he. There was a clause about Lily specifically, worded carefully to ensure her routine disruption was minimized. There was a provision that the marriage would be civilly registered but that no religious ceremony was required. At the bottom was a section he read twice. Emotional non-entanglement clause, he said. Standard, she said, for arrangements like this. Have you done arrangements like this before? No, but my lawyers have seen cases where agreements like this become complicated by unexpected feelings. The clause is a reminder that the purpose of the arrangement is transactional. He looked at it. Both parties agree to maintain professional emotional distance for the duration of the contract period. That's a strange thing to sign, he said. Yes. She met his eyes. It is. He looked back at the contract. It's also probably unenforceable. Legally, yes, but it clarifies intent. He set the folder down. Here's my question. The real one. He leaned forward slightly. Why does a woman like you, connected, obviously smart, obviously capable of solving most problems she encounters, not have a single person in her life she could call for this? No old friend, no trusted colleague. No one. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, just the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. There are people I could have asked, she said finally. Men I know. Men who would have said yes immediately and expected something in return that I didn't want to give, or men who would have agreed and then leveraged the position. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The problem with operating in my world is that everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. When my father died, I spent the first week trying to figure out who I could trust and came up with a very short list. She paused. You weren't on any list. You were just a man packing my father's books who didn't break anything and didn't look at me like I was a problem to be solved. Ethan was quiet. That might sound like a strange reason to trust someone, she said. No, he said. It actually makes sense. He picked up the pen from his shirt pocket, a regular ballpoint, the kind he used for work orders. He flipped to the signature page of the contract. He looked at it for a long moment. He thought about Lily's dream, her voice at 5 a.m, still half asleep, crying for someone who wasn't coming back. He thought about the $50 a month in the college fund. He thought about what $500,000 meant in a life like his. He signed. Victoria Sterling had not grown up soft. People assumed she had, because of the house and the schools and the name. They assumed Richard Sterling's daughter had lived a life of ease and privilege, and in material terms they weren't wrong. She'd never wanted for anything that money could provide. But Richard Sterling had been a demanding father in the specific way of self-made men who believe that anything given freely is never truly valued. He'd pushed Victoria harder than her brother had ever been pushed, partly because he'd recognized something of himself in her, and partly because he'd believed the world would push a woman harder than it pushed a man, and he wanted her ready. She'd been ready. She'd graduated top of her class from Wharton. She'd come back to Sterling Capital at 24 and worked her way up through positions that weren't given to her. She'd earned them, sometimes against active resistance from board members who resented a young woman with the founder's name and the founder's impatience. By 28, she was CFO. By 29, her father's health had begun to fail, and everyone in the building knew he was grooming her for succession. What nobody knew, including Victoria herself until the will was read, was the marriage clause. Her father's lawyer had explained it with the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news. The board has been anxious about stability. Your father believed a demonstration of personal stability would help consolidate your authority. As if an 80-year-old man had sat down and decided the best way to protect his daughter's inheritance was to legally require her to find a husband in 60 days. She'd sat in that lawyer's office and felt something she almost never felt: helpless. Not for long. She was her father's daughter, and she'd started solving the problem within the hour. But 6 weeks of calls and calculations and rejected options had brought her to the library where a man on a ladder had nearly dropped her father's Princeton diploma, caught it, and then handed it down to her with hands that were steady. She told herself it was pragmatic. She told herself she was evaluating a candidate, not making a personal choice. She told herself a lot of things. The first week was logistics. Victoria's house in Princeton was large and well-staffed enough that incorporating 2 additional people was operationally simple. What was not operationally simple was the adjustment of a 6-year-old who had never lived anywhere but a modest rental house in Millbrook and was now standing in a foyer the size of her entire apartment, holding her father's hand, looking up. "It's big," Lily said. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "Does someone clean it?" "Yes," Victoria said. "A woman named Donna. She's very nice." Lily considered this. "Our house, Daddy cleans it. Sometimes I help with the low parts." "That's an important job," Victoria said. Lily looked at her seriously. "I know." Victoria had been around children occasionally, at family events, at company functions with employees who brought their kids. She did not have extensive experience with them and had never particularly sought it. She was aware, in the way that competent people are aware of gaps in their knowledge, that she didn't know what to do with a 6-year-old. She discovered this more concretely that evening when Ethan's phone rang during dinner, a work call he had to take, stepping outside onto the back porch. And Victoria was left at the dining table with Lily, who was eating pasta and studying her with the frank curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned to pretend she wasn't staring. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" Lily asked. Victoria set down her fork. "We're friends," she said. "Good friends." "Adults who are good friends don't usually live together," Lily said, with the particular authority of a child who had been listening to adult conversations her whole life. Victoria looked at her. "That's fair. We're figuring things out." "What things?" "Grown-up things." Lily wrinkled her nose. "That's what Daddy says when he doesn't want to explain something." "Your father is a smart man." Lily seemed to accept this and went back to her pasta. Then, after a moment, "Do you have a mom?" Victoria went very still. "She passed away. A long time ago." Lily looked up immediately with the kind of direct empathy that children have before they learn to be awkward about it. "I don't have a mom either. She died too." "I know," Victoria said quietly. "I'm sorry." "Daddy says she's still with us because she's in our hearts." Lily said it with the careful accuracy of someone reciting something she'd been told. "But I think it would be better if she was also just here." Victoria had no response to that. There wasn't one. She just looked at the little girl and felt something she hadn't expected, something that arrived without warning like a hand pressed flat against the inside of her chest. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think that too." When Ethan came back in from the porch, he found them eating in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than it had been when he left. He looked at Lily. He looked at Victoria. He didn't ask. The days settled into an uneasy routine. Ethan drove into Millbrook 3 days a week to run jobs with Marcus and Pete. He'd been clear from the start that the company didn't stop. On the other days, he worked remotely, handling estimates and scheduling from the house's large kitchen table, which he'd commandeered as a workspace and which drove Victoria's housekeeper Donna quietly insane because he left coffee rings on it, despite having been shown where the coasters were multiple times. Victoria left early and came home late and spent the hours in between navigating what she described to Ethan in their occasional kitchen conversations as a controlled corporate war. The board had 3 factions. The first was loyal to Victoria. The second was waiting to see which way the wind blew. The third, led by a board member named Franklin Graves, who had been with Sterling Capital since before Victoria was born and had clearly expected to inherit more power when Richard died, was actively working against her. "Graves is moving money," Victoria said one evening, standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine she'd been intending to drink for an hour. "He's been quietly building relationships with 2 of the institutional investors. If he can flip them, he might be able to challenge my voting authority." Ethan, who had been reviewing invoices on the other side of the table, looked up. "What does he actually want?" "Control. Officially, he wants to restructure the board's oversight role. Practically, he wants to run the company without me in the way." "Could he do it?" "Not while I have voting shares, but the marriage clause—" She stopped. "That's why the clause exists," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. He'd been thinking about it. Your father put it in to force a demonstration of stability. But Graves could argue that a hasty marriage to someone outside your world is itself an instability. Victoria looked at him. Yes, exactly. So me being a moving guy isn't ideal. It's not ideal, she admitted. But you being my husband is more valuable than the optics of your career. The clause requires marriage. It doesn't specify to whom. You've thought about this a lot. I think about everything a lot. It's my primary flaw. She finally drank some of the wine. The plan is for you to accompany me to the quarterly investor dinner in 3 weeks. It needs to be convincing. Define convincing. Comfortable, familiar, like a couple who chose each other rather than a couple reading from a script. She looked at him. That's going to require some practice. You want to practice being married. I want to practice being comfortable in the same room in front of people who are looking for cracks. She said it briskly, the way she said most things. There's a difference. Ethan considered this. Dinner, he said. Tomorrow night, you, me, Lily, no work, no phones, just dinner and whatever comes after. We see what it's like to be normal. She blinked slightly. Normal. Yeah, normal. Like people. I know how to be normal. Do you? She opened her mouth and closed it. Then, surprisingly, the corners of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Tomorrow, she said. Fine. They had pasta again, because Lily had requested it, and Ethan had learned not to argue with Lily's food opinions. He cooked while Victoria stood at the island, initially offering to help in the awkward way of someone who didn't cook and knew it, then eventually drifting into conversation as he worked. They talked about his father's moving company, how he'd started helping as a teenager, how he'd taken it over after his father's heart attack, how he'd built the client base slowly over 6 years. She listened without interrupting, which was not something he'd expected. You're good at that, she said. At what? Listening to people who need someone to handle something carefully. She gestured vaguely. At the estate, you handled everything like it mattered. It did matter. To you. Most people in your position would just see boxes. Most people in my position have seen enough grieving families to know boxes are never just boxes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my father wasn't easy to grieve. We were close, in the way of people who are too alike and too stubborn to say it easily. When he got sick, we had 6 months of knowing it was coming, and we still spent most of that time arguing about the company. She looked at her hands. I keep thinking there was a conversation we were supposed to have that we never got to. Ethan put the spoon down and turned to look at her. What would you have said? She thought about it for a long time, long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. That I was proud to be his daughter, she said finally, even when he was impossible. In the living room, Lily was on the floor with a book, talking softly to a stuffed elephant she'd named Gerald, which nobody in the house mentioned was also the name of Victoria's lawyer. Ethan looked at Victoria and said, very quietly, he knew. She looked at him. Fathers always know, he said. She was still for a moment. Then she picked up the pasta spoon he'd set down and handed it back to him. It's going to boil over, she said. Right. He turned back to the stove. They didn't talk about it again that night, but when dinner was over and Lily fell asleep on the couch mid-sentence, Ethan carried her upstairs and Victoria stood in the kitchen doorway watching, and neither of them said anything, and the silence was different from the silence at the beginning. 3 weeks later, they went to the investor dinner. Victoria wore dark blue. Ethan wore the best suit he owned, a charcoal gray he'd bought for a wedding 5 years ago. And she looked at it when he came downstairs and said nothing, which he correctly interpreted as, that will do. They drove together. In the car, she briefed him on the attendees, who mattered, who was watching, what Franklin Graves looked like, and why they needed to not react when they saw him. Ethan listened with the same focused attention he gave to pre-job walkthroughs. And if someone asks how we met, he said, we met when you were handling my father's estate, which is true. Fell in love while packing boxes, he said. She glanced at him. Don't say fell in love. Say we connected. Say it was unexpected. Was it? A pause. Yes, she said. It was. The dinner was in a hotel ballroom that had been designed to look like it wasn't trying too hard and was in fact trying very hard. 70 people, a string quartet, waitstaff moving through the room with a choreography that cost someone money. Franklin Graves was near the bar when they arrived. He was 63, broad in the shoulders, with the easy confidence of someone who had been powerful for long enough that it had become his default posture. He saw Victoria immediately. His eyes moved to Ethan. Something happened in his expression, a calculation, very quick. Victoria put her hand on Ethan's arm. Not dramatically, just a touch, like it was natural. Ethan put his hand over hers, like it was also natural. Graves smiled and turned back to his conversation. Good, Victoria said, very quietly, not moving her hand. I've carried pianos out of buildings, Ethan murmured. I think I can handle dinner. The surprised exhale of breath she let out, half laugh, quickly controlled, was the first genuinely unguarded thing he'd seen from her. They moved through the room together, and neither of them was reading from a script. Later, in the car going home, the city lights going past the windows, Victoria said, Graves watched you all night. I know. What did you talk to him about when he came over? His watch. He was wearing a vintage Rolex. I told him my father had one. He did. It was the only expensive thing he owned. He got it at an estate sale. Graves loves vintage watches. We talked about it for 20 minutes. Victoria stared at him. People like to be seen, Ethan said. Doesn't matter how much money they have. She kept staring, then she turned back to the window. That was smarter than anything I had planned, she said. I know, he said. And then, because the moment was what it was, he added, You're welcome. This time, she didn't stop the laugh. They were home by 11. Mrs. Caruso, who had agreed to watch Lily for the night after they'd worked out the logistics, had put Lily to bed at 8:30 and left a note saying there had been one request for water, one question about whether bears slept in the winter, and no other complications. Ethan read the note in the kitchen and smiled at it. Victoria was in the doorway, heels off, barefoot on the tile. Successful night, she said. Yeah. He folded the note. Lily's asleep. The bears hibernate. Graves is charmed by your husband. All good. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression that he couldn't quite name. Not the evaluating look, not the controlled CEO look. Something less organized. Thank you, she said. For tonight. It's the arrangement, he said. I know. She paused. Still. He nodded. She went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen for a while, in the quiet house, with the faint sound of Lily's sound machine coming through the ceiling. He hadn't expected to feel comfortable here. He'd expected to feel like a man playing a role in someone else's story. He was still playing a role. He knew that. But the house was quiet and his daughter was asleep upstairs, and something about the evening, the dinner, the drive home, the unexpected laugh, had settled into his chest in a way that he didn't entirely know what to do with. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. 6 months. 60 days down to 41. 41 down to the first week done. Ethan Walker had signed a contract for $500,000 and a clean exit. He was already beginning to understand that no contract he'd ever signed had prepared him for this. The second month started with a broken garbage disposal and ended with Ethan understanding something he hadn't been prepared for. But that came later. The disposal went out on a Tuesday morning. A grinding shriek from the kitchen sink that brought Victoria out of her home office in a way that 3 weeks of Ethan's presence hadn't managed. She stood in the kitchen doorway in a blazer she'd put on at 7 a.m. for a video call, looking at the sink like it had personally insulted her. It does that, Ethan said. He was already under the sink with a flashlight. Does it do that often? Old disposal, probably original to the house. Hand me that wrench. She picked up the wrench from the toolbox he'd opened on the floor and handed it down to him. He noticed she handed it correctly. Handle first without being asked. Small thing. He noticed it anyway. I have a property manager, she said. I can call him. I've got it. Ethan, you don't have to... Victoria. He said her name the way he said Lily's name when she was arguing about something she didn't need to argue about. I've got it. She was quiet. He heard her move, the sound of a chair being pulled out, the soft settle of someone sitting down at the kitchen table, staying but giving him room. It took 20 minutes. The disposal needed a reset and a cleared jam. Someone had apparently put something hard down there, and Ethan's best guess was a piece of Lily's Halloween candy that had gone missing 2 weeks ago. He didn't say that part out loud. When he slid out from under the sink and tested it, a clean, normal hum, Victoria looked up from the papers she'd been reading. "Thank you," she said. "It needs replacing eventually. Another 6 months and it'll go again." She looked at him steadily. 6 months, she repeated. He hadn't meant it the way it landed. He wiped his hands on a rag and didn't pursue it. That was how most of their conversations went in the second month. Threading carefully past the landmines of the arrangement, the constant awareness of what this was and what it wasn't, the easy distance they'd both agreed to and were both, in their separate ways, starting to find slightly harder to maintain. Lily was not helping. Lily was, in fact, aggressively not helping, in the way of small children who have no awareness of adult complications and an unerring instinct for the exact moment when two grown people most need emotional reinforcement. She'd decided she liked Victoria with the same decisive completeness with which she decided she liked particular foods or songs. Fully, immediately, without ambivalence. She left drawings on Victoria's desk, not the refrigerator drawings. Those were family drawings for Ethan. These were different. A woman with dark hair at a big desk. A woman with dark hair reading a book. Once, disconcertingly, a woman with dark hair and a little girl holding hands outside what appeared to be a castle, which was either the Princeton house rendered impressionistically or something Lily had invented entirely. Victoria put every single one in the top right drawer of her desk. Ethan saw her do it once, from the hallway. She didn't know he was there. She looked at the drawing for a moment. A long moment, the way she'd looked at her father's diploma, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer. He went back to the kitchen and said nothing. The days continued. Ethan drove to Millbrook. He ran jobs with Marcus and Pete. He came home. He'd started thinking of the Princeton house as home without meaning to, without catching the moment it happened, and made dinner when he got there before Victoria, or ate with Lily when he didn't. On the nights Victoria worked late, he'd find her in the kitchen at 10 or 11, standing at the counter eating leftover whatever he'd made, reading something on her phone. "You eat standing up," he told her one night. "I eat when I have time." That's not the same thing as eating. Thank you for that nutritional insight. "Sit down." She looked at him. He pulled out a chair at the table. After a moment, she sat. He got her a glass of water without asking. "You do that," she said. "Do what?" "Take care of things. People." She said it observationally, not warmly, like noting a quality in a subject she was studying. "You do it automatically." "My dad was the same way." He sat across from her. "Drove my mom crazy sometimes. She'd say he was always solving problems instead of just sitting with them." "Was she wrong?" "She was right, actually. He was better at fixing things than feeling them." He paused. "I used to think I was different from him. Now I'm not sure." Victoria looked at him over her water glass. "Is that a bad thing?" "Depends on what needs fixing." She looked down at her phone, then apparently decided to put it down. It was a small gesture, and he was fairly sure she didn't realize she'd made it. "The board meeting went long today," she said. "Graves tried to introduce a motion about executive oversight review. He didn't have the votes, but he made it close." "How close?" 5-4. He needed 6. She said it neutrally, but he could hear the effort in the neutrality. "He's going to keep trying." "Yes, he's patient. He's been at this company for 30 years and he knows how to wait." She turned her fork over in her hand. "He said something to me after the meeting, in the hallway, very quietly. He said, 'I hope your personal situation is as stable as it looks.' He's probing. He knows something doesn't add up. He just doesn't know what." She looked up. "He's going to dig." "Then we give him nothing to find." She studied him. "You're calmer about this than I expected." "I've dealt with difficult clients." He shrugged. "People who want something from you and dress it up as something else. You learn to not give them the reaction they're looking for." "Graves is more dangerous than a difficult client." "I know. I'm still not going to lose sleep over him." Something in her expression, A fraction of the tension releasing. Not all of it, just a fraction. You're either very confident or very naive. Jury's still out, he said. She almost smiled. They sat there for a while after that, not talking about anything that mattered, and it was the most comfortable evening they'd had. The garbage disposal was still humming faintly in the sink, the way old machines do when they've been reminded they still work. The second month turned slowly into the third. The third month was when things started to shift in ways that Ethan couldn't quite put a name to. Not dramatic shifts, not the kind of thing you could point to in a scene and say there, that's where it changed. More like the way a season changes. You don't see it happening, and then one day you're standing outside and the light is different, and you realize it's been different for a while. It started, maybe, with the Tuesday nights. He wasn't sure how it became a Tuesday thing. Lily had a class on Tuesday afternoons, an art program at the Princeton Community Center that she'd joined in her second week and immediately loved. And on those days, Ethan picked her up at 5, and they had 2 hours before dinner. At some point, Victoria had started leaving the office early enough to be home by 6:30 on Tuesdays. She hadn't said anything about it. She just started being there. Lily noticed immediately and was delighted. Victoria pretended not to know she was doing it. Ethan let it go. What he couldn't let go, or couldn't stop noticing, was what happened on those Tuesday evenings. Lily had started coming home with projects, drawings, small sculptures made from clay, once an ambitious watercolor of what she said was the ocean at nighttime, that was mainly dark blue with some white patches, but had a genuine, startling quality of atmosphere to it. The third Tuesday of the month, Lily came through the door with a flat canvas board and the words, "I made a portrait," delivered with the gravity of a major announcement. "Can I see?" Victoria asked. She was in the living room with a work folder that Ethan had watched her close when Lily came in. Lily considered. "It's not totally done. I'm still working on the hair. I'd love to see the in-progress version if that's okay." This was the right answer. Lily beamed and showed her. It was a portrait of a woman, dark hair, yes, still in progress, seated at a desk with papers around her. The likeness was loose and childlike, but the posture was recognizable. The feeling of it was recognizable. "Lily," Victoria said, "is this me?" "You work at your desk a lot," Lily said matter-of-factly. "You looked interesting." Victoria looked at the painting for a moment. "I love it," she said, flatly, like a statement of fact. "I'm not done with the hair." "The hair looks good already." "It needs more layers." Lily took it back, satisfied, and carried it to the kitchen table to continue working. Ethan was leaning in the doorway. Victoria looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything. But something passed between them that was harder to ignore than it should have been. The shift kept happening, quietly, in the spaces between the things they'd agreed to. One evening, Lily woke from the dream again. It was past midnight, the house dark and quiet, and Ethan was up before she'd finished calling for him, the way parents are, already moving before he was fully awake. He went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, talked her down from the edges of whatever the dream had put in front of her. He hadn't heard Victoria's door. He only knew she was there when he came out of Lily's room and found her in the hallway, leaning against the wall, arms folded loosely. Her hair was down, which he hadn't seen before. She was in pajamas and an old sweatshirt. She looked like a person, not a CEO. "Is she okay?" she asked, quiet. "She will be. She has these sometimes." He pulled the door mostly closed. "The dream about Sarah." Victoria nodded slowly. Do you need anything?" "No, she'll sleep now." He looked at her. "You don't have to be up." "I heard her." She said it simply. "Hard to sleep through." They stood in the hallway for a moment, both of them still half in the pulled-from-sleep version of themselves, the careful social surface of daytime not quite assembled yet. "She cries for her mom," Victoria said. Quietly, not a question. "Yeah." "Does it—" She stopped. "Does it what?" She looked at the floor, then back at him. "Does it get easier for her?" He thought about lying, about saying yes. "It does. It gets easier every month. She's fine." He didn't. "Some days are easier. Some days she surprises me with how much she's carrying." He put his hands in his pockets. The hard part is she misses someone she barely got to know. She's grieving someone she only has pieces of. Victoria was very still. That's a particular kind of hard, she said. You know something about that. She looked at him for a moment. My mother left when I was 7, she said. Not the same as yours, but pieces, yes. She said it evenly, in the way of someone who had organized this information long ago and put it somewhere manageable. I understand pieces. I didn't know that, he said. No reason you would. She pushed off the wall. I'll let you sleep. Victoria. She turned. Thank you for being up, he said. It helped, knowing someone else heard. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once and went back to her room. He stood in the hallway for a while after that, in the dark, listening to Lily's sound machine hum through the door. The 4th month arrived and brought with it a charity gala, a small crisis, and the moment that Ethan would later identify as the point where the arrangement started feeling like something that had no good word for it. The gala was the Sterling Foundation's annual fundraiser, one of the biggest events on the Foundation's calendar, and one Victoria had been preparing for since before Ethan had signed anything. It mattered more than the investor dinner had. The people in that room would be writing checks to programs that fed children, funded scholarships, kept community health clinics running. Victoria took it seriously in a way she didn't even take board meetings. She was also, as the event approached, running on approximately 4 hours of sleep a night and surviving on coffee and whatever Ethan left in the kitchen. You need to eat a real meal before the gala, he told her on Thursday, 4 days before the event. I'm eating. Standing over the sink at 11 p.m. isn't eating. I was in a time crunch. Victoria. He said it the same way he always did. She was starting to recognize it. The way he said her name when she was being unreasonable, and he wasn't going to argue about it, just state the case. I have 47 emails to respond to tonight, she said. Then you have 47 emails to respond to after dinner. Sit down. She sat down. He made her an actual dinner. Chicken, which he'd prepared earlier and reheated with rice and the green beans she'd mentioned once in passing that she liked. She ate all of it, which he noted without saying anything. You know what's strange, she said toward the end of the meal. Probably a lot of things. This is the most regularly I've eaten in 6 years. She said it without apparent irony. I used to forget lunch entirely, sometimes dinner. What changed? She gave him a look. You put food in front of me. Your people need you functional, he said. The foundation needs you functional. Is that why you feed me? Organizational efficiency? He looked at her. No, he said. She looked back at him. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds too long to be comfortable, and then she looked down at her plate, and the moment dissolved. The gala, she said. Tell me what you need. She told him. He listened. She needed him to work the room in a specific way. Not graves this time, but a collection of foundation donors whose continued giving was not guaranteed. Old money families who were skeptical of new leadership. People who had loved Richard Sterling the way people love figures they project their values onto. They need to believe I'm not just my father's corporation, Victoria said. They need to believe there's a person there who understands what the foundation is actually for. Are they wrong about you? She hesitated. The corporation has made demands. There have been times when the foundation's priorities got secondary treatment because the board wanted it that way. She said it with the particular discomfort of someone admitting to something they weren't proud of. I let it happen once or twice when I shouldn't have. It's one of the things I'm trying to correct. So tell them that. At a gala. Maybe not the financial details, but the intention. He leaned forward. You want them to see a person, then be one. People can tell when someone's performing and when they're not. She studied him. You do that naturally. I grew up around people who didn't have any reason to perform. You get used to reading the difference. The gala, when it came, was the largest event Ethan had attended in his life. The Sterling Foundation had rented a museum hall and filled it with flowers, a live orchestra, and approximately 300 people in formal wear. Ethan wore a tuxedo that Victoria had sent someone to fit for him a week in advance, He'd argued about this and lost, and he had to admit, standing in the mirror before they left, that it was the best he'd looked in years. Lily, who was being watched by Mrs. Caruso for the evening, had informed him solemnly that he looked like a real penguin, and that this was a compliment. Victoria came downstairs in something dark green that did things to the light around her, and Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than he'd intended and said, "Ready?" And she said yes, and they went to the gala. The evening went well until it didn't. The crisis arrived around 9 o'clock in the form of a journalist, not a hostile one, just an opportunistic one, who cornered Victoria near the bar and started asking questions about the board's recent motions. Someone had leaked. Not the specific details of the marriage clause, but the existence of a governance challenge at Sterling Capital, and this journalist had done enough homework to make the questions pointed. Ethan saw Victoria's face change, not dramatically, she was too controlled for that, but he'd been living with her for 3 months, and he could read the micro-adjustments now. The slight tightening around the jaw, the careful stillness that meant she was managing something. He crossed the room. He didn't burst in. He came up next to her with the easy movement of a man approaching his wife at a party, touched the small of her back lightly, and said, to the journalist pleasantly, "Sorry to interrupt. David Marsh, right? I read your piece on the infrastructure bill last year. Thought the sourcing was exceptional." The journalist blinked. "You read? Victoria, Harrison Ellery's been looking for you. I told him you'd be over in a few minutes." He looked at the journalist again. "She'll find you later tonight if you want to continue. Is that all right?" It was done smoothly enough that the journalist seemed genuinely charmed rather than brushed off, and Victoria walked away from the conversation with her composure intact and her expression doing something he'd never seen it do before. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, low, as they moved through the crowd. "I told you. Difficult clients. That man is a journalist. He's also a person who likes being recognized for his work. Same principle." He moved his hand from her back. "You okay?" She stopped. They were in a relatively quiet corner of the hall, away from the nearest cluster of guests. "How did you know to come over?" "I was watching." "You were across the room talking to the Ellery family." "I was also watching you." She looked at him with that unreadable expression, and then something happened to it. The readability increased briefly, and what was underneath was something that Ethan found difficult to look at directly. Not because it was bad, because it wasn't. "Thank you," she said. "You've said that before." "I'll probably keep saying it. You don't have to." "Ethan," his name in her voice with something underneath it. "I know I don't have to. That's why I want to." Harrison Ellery materialized out of the crowd at that exact moment and saved them both from whatever was happening in that corner of the museum. The rest of the evening was a success. Victoria spoke to the skeptical donors without performing and without calculating. She just talked, the way Ethan had suggested, about what the foundation had actually failed to do and what she intended to fix. One old woman, 80 at least, with the posture of someone raised to have posture, took Victoria's hands afterward and said something too quiet for Ethan to hear. Victoria came back to him with her eyes slightly brighter than usual. "What did she say?" he asked in the car. "She said my father would have been proud of tonight." She looked out the window. "Margaret Ellery. She's known my family for 40 years. She never says things she doesn't mean." "Good. She also said you had kind eyes." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "That's a nice thing to say." "She's a good judge of character." He kept his eyes on the road. In his peripheral vision, he could see Victoria watching him, and he let it go. And they drove home through the dark, with the radio very quietly playing something he couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Caruso had put Lily to bed and left a note saying there had been a request for one extra cookie, denied on health grounds, a request for a second story, granted it was short, and a report that Lily had said Victoria's house had the best bathtub because it was big enough to swim in. Ethan read the note. "She's not wrong," he said. "It is a very big bathtub." Victoria was sitting on the kitchen counter, shoes off, which she did sometimes when she thought no one was paying attention. "Tell her she can use it any time." "She'll hold you to that." "I know." There was a warmth in how she said it that caught him. Not warmth as performance, just warmth, real and unconstructed, the kind that slips out when someone stops thinking about whether they're letting it show. He looked at her sitting there, blazer still on, hair starting to come loose from wherever it had been pinned, the careful billionaire partly dismantled into just a person on a counter in her kitchen. And he thought, this is going to be hard. Not the arrangement, not the contract, not Graves or the board or the 60-day clock that had already counted down past the halfway mark. This specific thing, this was going to be hard. He turned and put the kettle on. Tea? Yes, she said. Please. They drank tea at the kitchen table at midnight and talked about nothing important for an hour. And it was the best hour of Ethan's last 2 years, and he didn't tell her that, and he went to bed carrying it. The 5th week of the 4th month, Marcus called. How's the rich life? He asked when Ethan picked up. Same as regular life, more square footage. Pete says you sound different. Pete has never heard what I sound like on a phone call. He says you sound like a man who's thinking about something he's not saying. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He was in the truck, parked outside a job site in Millbrook, eating a sandwich. Pete should mind his own business. He's 51. Minding his own business gives him too much time to think about his knees. How's the schedule? Marcus let him change the subject, but Ethan knew he'd been read. Marcus had a way of seeing things without pushing, which was more useful than it looked. The schedule was good. The business was fine. He'd been afraid when he'd agreed to this that his being less present would damage what he'd built, but Marcus had stepped up in a way that Ethan hadn't fully anticipated, and Pete had started training the new kid, Danny, with the patient thoroughness of someone who understood craft. The company was running. It didn't need him less. It just didn't need him constantly. He wasn't sure if that felt like freedom or loss. He drove back to Princeton with the radio on and thought about the contract. 4 months done. 2 left. He thought about it practically, the way he'd tried to think about all of this from the beginning. The money was real. The benefit to Lily was real. The arrangement was working. Sterling Capital was stable. The Foundation Gala had reset some important relationships, and Graves had been quieter in the past month, which meant either he was retreating or he was building toward something. The arrangement was working, which was the problem, in a way, because the arrangement working was not the same as the arrangement being easy, and it had not been easy for a while. Victoria was difficult in the ways that certain kinds of people are difficult, the ones who run so hard and so organized that they've forgotten how to let anything catch them off guard. She was occasionally impatient. She sometimes reverted to the CEO version of herself in moments that didn't call for it, giving instructions when a conversation would have done better. She left cabinet doors open. She had once, without any apparent awareness of the strangeness of this, sent Ethan a detailed email about the home's maintenance schedule rather than just telling him. But she was also the woman who put Lily's drawings in her desk drawer. She was the woman in the hallway at midnight who had stayed up because she'd heard a child cry. She was the person who had said, "I understand pieces," and left it there, without asking for anything back. She was more than he'd expected. That was the honest version. He'd signed a contract expecting a transaction. He was somewhere in the middle of something that was refusing to stay in its lane. That night, he came home to find Victoria and Lily on the living room floor surrounded by what appeared to be an extremely ambitious puzzle. 500 pieces, something involving a map of the world. "There's dinner in the kitchen," Victoria said without looking up. "I made it." He stopped in the doorway. "You cooked." "I heated it up. Donna left it. I put it on plates and chose appropriate serving temperatures. That's close enough." "Where's Australia?" Lily demanded. "Down here." Victoria found the piece. "In the southern hemisphere, below Asia." "Australia is very far away." "It is." "Could we go there?" A pause. Victoria's hand stilled over the puzzle pieces. The question was, of course, innocent. Lily had no subtext. She just wanted to know about a faraway place. "Maybe someday," Victoria said. Her voice was careful and steady and gave nothing away. Lily accepted this and went back to looking for the piece with the kangaroo on it. Ethan went to the kitchen and stood by the counter for a moment, looking at the plate Donna had left, the plate Victoria had warmed. Through the doorway, he could hear Lily talking, a continuous, comfortable narration of her thoughts about kangaroos, which were apparently many. He heard Victoria laugh, a real one, Not the controlled exhale from the investor dinner, not the polite social laugh from the gala. A real laugh, surprised out of her by whatever Lily had just said. He stood in the kitchen and held on to that sound, very carefully, the way you hold on to something you already know you're going to miss. The 4th month ended. The 5th month began. Ethan stopped doing the math as often. He tried not to notice that he'd stopped, but he noticed it anyway, the way he'd notice any small failure of discipline. He'd started this counting the days. He'd started this with a clear accounting of what it was and what it wasn't. He wasn't sure when exactly he'd stopped being able to count the days without feeling something complicated about the number going down. Lily had started calling Victoria by her first name, not Miss Sterling, as she'd started with, not Ms. Victoria, as she'd settled into, just Victoria, the way you say the name of someone who has become a fixture of your landscape. Victoria had not commented on this. She'd answered to it like she'd always answered to it. One Saturday, Ethan came downstairs to find them at the kitchen table with Lily's homework spread out between them. Lily had math, 2nd grade math, addition and subtraction, but Lily had developed a strong opinion that math was unfair and required convincing. Victoria was apparently in the middle of making a case for why subtraction was actually interesting. If you have 23 apples, Victoria was saying, with a seriousness that the situation did not require, and someone takes away 9, who's taking my apples? Let's say a neighboring farmer in a trade. What are they giving me back? That's a different problem. This problem is just about the apples leaving. I don't like the apples leaving. Lily, the apples are abstract. They're my abstract apples. Ethan poured himself coffee and did not intervene. Victoria, to her credit, did not escalate or retreat. She looked at Lily steadily for a moment, then said, "All right, you have $23. You want to buy something that costs $9. How much do you have left?" Lily's entire energy shifted. "What am I buying?" "Whatever you want." "A stuffed elephant. A $9 stuffed elephant. How much money is left?" Lily counted on her fingers with intense concentration. $14? Correct. Lily looked at the paper in front of her with an expression suggesting that mathematics had, under these specific circumstances, become acceptable. She picked up her pencil and wrote 14. Victoria caught Ethan's eye over Lily's head. He raised his coffee cup slightly. She shook her head, but she was almost smiling, that almost smile. He'd started cataloging them without meaning to. The one at the investor dinner, the one in the car after the gala, the ones she had with Lily, more frequent now, arriving with less warning, the ones that happened when she was tired enough that she'd stopped monitoring her own face. He was cataloging them the way people catalog things they're afraid of losing. The 5th month wasn't where the crisis hit. That came later, and it came the way these things always come. Not when you're braced for it, but when you've almost forgotten to be. But in the 5th month, on a Sunday afternoon in November, Lily fell asleep on the living room couch between them. She'd been reading her elephant book and simply stopped, in the sudden total way children fall asleep, like something switched off. And the house was quiet, and outside the window the last of the fall leaves were doing their final business with the trees. Victoria looked at Lily, then she looked at the window. There was something in her expression that had become familiar to Ethan now, even though he'd never been able to name it exactly. Something that was part grief and part longing and part the particular tiredness of someone who has worked very hard not to want things and is suddenly finding the work exhausting. "I thought this would be easier than it is," she said, quietly, to no one specific. "What would?" She didn't answer right away. "Not getting attached," she said finally, "to the sleeping 6-year-old, or to the Sunday afternoon, or to the particular quality of light in a house she was beginning to think of differently than she'd planned." Ethan looked at Lily too, her face in sleep, completely trusting, completely at rest. "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." They didn't look at each other. They sat with the weight of what they'd both just said, and neither of them took it back. And the afternoon light did what afternoon light does in November, tilting and thinning toward early dark. Lily slept on, untroubled. The 6th month was coming. The 6th month arrived without announcement, the way endings always do, not with a signal or a warning, but simply as the next day after the day before, ordinary on the surface and heavy underneath. Ethan noticed the date on a Monday morning. He was standing in the kitchen making Lily's lunch. Peanut butter, no jelly, cut diagonally, because she'd informed him at age 4 that triangles tasted better than rectangles, and he'd never found a convincing argument against this. And he saw the calendar on the wall, the one Lily had decorated with stickers in October, and he counted back from the date they'd signed. 6 months from that Thursday. 18 days. He finished making the sandwich and put it in the bag and called Lily down for breakfast and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the calendar hadn't already said. Victoria was traveling that week, Chicago, 2 days of meetings about the institutional investors Graves had been working on. She'd left early Monday morning before Lily was awake, which meant the goodbyes had been the previous night. Lily getting an actual hug, unprompted, which had happened with increasing frequency over the last 2 months, and Victoria accepting it with the slightly overwhelmed care of someone still learning how to receive uncomplicated affection. Ethan had said, "Safe travels," and she'd said, "I'll be back Wednesday." And they'd looked at each other in the way they'd been looking at each other since November, and neither of them had said the other thing. There was always another thing now. That was the 5th month's work, building up this inventory of unsaid things that sat between them like furniture in a room they were both pretending not to navigate around. He drove Lily to school. On the way back, Marcus called. "Checking in," Marcus said. How's the schedule looking for January?" January. Ethan was quiet for a beat. "Should be normal. I'll be back full time." "Yeah?" Marcus sounded careful. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. The arrangement, it's ending on schedule. I'll be back in Millbrook after the 1st. A pause. "Lily too." "Yeah, Lily too." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You doing okay with that?" "It was always the plan." "That's not what I asked." Ethan pulled into the driveway of the Princeton house and sat in the car. The house looked the same as it had 6 months ago, the first time he'd driven up. Same iron-colored slate roof, same old trees, same sense of a place that had absorbed decades of living. It didn't look different. But he saw it differently now. He knew which floorboard on the second landing creaked. He knew that the kitchen got the best morning light at 7 a.m., and that if you left the back window open in autumn, the whole room smelled like wet leaves. He knew this house the way you know a place you've lived in, not a place you've visited. "I'll be fine," he told Marcus. Marcus, who was 24 and not stupid, said okay and let it go. Ethan went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while in the 7 a.m. light, and then he called a real estate agent in Millbrook about rental listings and started making notes. Victoria came back from Chicago on Wednesday evening with 2 pieces of news, one good and one not. The good, she'd met with the 2 institutional investors Graves had been courting, and both had confirmed their continued support of her leadership. It wasn't permanent, this kind of loyalty never was, but it closed off the most immediate threat Graves had been building toward. The foundation was safe. The company was stable. The not good came out over dinner after Lily had gone to bed. Victoria had poured herself a glass of wine and was standing at the kitchen counter, which meant she was working out how to say something. "Graves filed a formal inquiry," she said, "with the board's ethics committee." Ethan looked up from where he was stacking dishes. "About what?" "About the marriage." She set the glass down. "He's alleging that the marriage was contracted in bad faith, that it was a strategic arrangement designed to circumvent the will's provisions rather than a genuine marital union." She said it in the flattest possible voice, which Ethan had learned meant she was managing something significant underneath. He doesn't have proof, but he's requesting access to financial records and asking the committee to investigate whether payments were made. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Can he get the records?" Ethan asked. "Not without board authorization, which he doesn't currently have, but the inquiry creates a process, and the process creates the appearance of something to investigate, and in corporate governance, appearances matter as much as facts." She picked the glass back up. "Gerald thinks he might be bluffing, trying to create pressure. What do you think?" "I think Graves has been at this company for 30 years and has never bluffed." She looked at him. "He thinks he found something. Has he?" "The NDA protects us legally. There's nothing in the public record that distinguishes this from a genuine marriage." She paused. "Practically, if the inquiry goes to full investigation, They could subpoena financial records. The payments to you are structured in a way that's defensible, but in context, she stopped. In context, they look like what they are, Ethan said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? She looked at him. I don't need anything from you. I need to deal with this. She stopped again in the way she did when she was working out whether the next sentence was appropriate to say. I wanted to tell you directly, not through Gerald. Okay, he said. It's probably going to get worse before the end of the month. I figured. He turned back to the dishes. You'll handle it. Ethan, he looked over his shoulder. I know the 6 months ends on the 23rd, she said. I know you're already planning the transition. I'm not asking you to alter that. She held his gaze steadily. I want you to know that whatever happens with Graves, it's not your problem to solve. You've done more than the contract required. It was a gracious thing to say. It was also, Ethan thought, the most careful way possible to remind them both where the boundaries were. I know, he said. He turned back to the dishes and the tap ran and the kitchen was quiet. What he didn't say, standing at the sink with the water running, that's exactly the problem. Thursday of that week, Lily came home from school with a project. It was a family tree. Standard second grade assignment, a large sheet of paper with a tree template, spaces for names and photos in the branches. She'd been given a week to fill it in, but she'd apparently been working on it at school during free period and had made significant progress. She spread it on the kitchen table with the proprietary satisfaction of someone presenting important work. Ethan looked at it. His name was in the trunk section. Sarah's name was there, labeled Mommy, with a small photograph. Lily must have brought one from her room, tucked into the space. His parents were in the branches above. His sister in Illinois. And in a branch that should have been left blank, drawn in with Lily's careful crayon, was a figure with dark hair. No photograph. Lily hadn't asked for one, just the drawing. And next to it, in Lily's handwriting, the name Victoria. Ethan sat down. Lily, he said carefully. She's family, Lily said with the simple authority of a 7-year-old who has made a classification and does not expect it to be contested. Sweetheart, the assignment is for... She lives with us. She eats with us. She helps me with math, even though she makes it hard first. Lily looked at him with her mother's eyes. That's what family is. He looked at the tree, at the dark-haired crayon figure in the branches of his daughter's family. She might not live with us forever, he said. He said it as gently as he could, which was not gently enough. Lily frowned. Why? Because grown-up things change. Living situations change. Where would she go? She'd stay here. We'd go back to Millbrook. Lily's expression went through several phases in quick succession. Confusion, then realization, then something that Ethan recognized with a gut punch as the beginning of grief. She'd made that face before. He knew exactly what came next. We're leaving? She said. Not right away, but you said we were staying. Her voice had gone careful in the way it went careful before it broke. I said we'd be here for a while. We've been here for a while. He reached for her hand. Lily, does Victoria know? She asked it with a directness that was almost adult. He didn't answer immediately. Does she know we're going? Lily said again. Yes, he said. She knows. Lily looked at the family tree. She looked at the dark-haired figure she'd drawn in the branches. Then she picked up her paper and took it to her room and closed the door, not with a slam but with the quiet, deliberate click of someone who has decided they're done with the conversation. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He heard Victoria's car in the driveway an hour later. She came through the back door, still in her work clothes, and read the kitchen immediately. The way she'd learned to read rooms, the specific quality of stillness that meant something had happened. Where's Lily? She asked. Her room. Victoria set her bag down. What happened? He told her. The family tree. The dark-haired crayon figure. The conversation. He told it plainly, without editorializing, and watched her face do the thing it did now that it hadn't done in the first month. The thing where the control slipped just slightly, and the person underneath moved briefly to the surface. She sat down at the table. I didn't think about that, she said. I should have thought about that. Neither did I. She's 7. Of course she would. Victoria stopped. She put both hands flat on the table. I should go talk to her. You don't have to. I want to. She said it before he'd finished the sentence, and then seemed to register what she'd said, the speed at which she'd said it. She looked at him. Is that all right? He nodded. She went upstairs. He heard her knock. Heard Lily's voice, quiet. Heard the door open. He didn't follow. He sat in the kitchen and listened to the silence of the house, and thought about 18 days, and about a lease he hadn't signed yet in Millbrook, and about a crayon drawing in a family tree. He sat there for 40 minutes. When Victoria came back downstairs, she sat across from him at the table and did not say anything for a moment. She showed me the whole tree, Victoria said finally. Named everyone. Told me about your sister in Illinois, who she's never met but thinks is probably nice. A pause. She told me her mother was the most beautiful person who ever lived. She is, Ethan said. She was. Victoria looked at her hands. She drew me in the tree, Ethan. I know. She said I was. Her voice didn't break, but it came close, which was something he'd never seen from her before. She said I was the person who made the house feel less quiet. The kitchen was very quiet right now. The particular quiet of a house where a child is upstairs, settled, and 2 adults are sitting with something they've been not saying for a long time. Victoria, he started. Don't, she said. I know what you were going to say. She looked up. You were going to be reasonable. You're always reasonable. You were going to say something about the arrangement, or about what's best for Lily, or about not wanting to make things complicated. Her voice was controlled, but it was work. I don't want reasonable right now. He looked at her. Okay. I don't know how to do this, she said. I don't know how to... She gestured in a way that encompassed nothing specific and everything relevant. I built this as a transaction. I knew what it was. I made you sign a document specifically to prevent exactly what is currently... She stopped. I'm very aware of the irony. Yeah, he said. And I'm aware that you're leaving in 18 days and that you've been planning it, and I'm aware that the arrangement was always the arrangement. She looked at him. I'm just not sure what to do with the fact that somewhere in the last 4 months, I stopped wanting it to end. He was very still. That's all I'm saying, she said. I'm not asking you for anything. I know the contract. The contract ends in 18 days, he said. After that, the contract is a piece of paper. I know. So if I have something to say after that, Ethan. She looked at him with a directness that was partly the CEO and partly the woman in the hallway at midnight, mostly something that was both. I put a clause in the contract specifically because I was afraid of this. I know you did. The clause exists because I knew myself well enough to know I was a risk. I form attachment slowly, and then... She pressed her lips together. And then I'm terrible at letting go. You think I don't know that about you? She looked at him. Victoria, he said, I've been living with you for 5 months. I know how you take your coffee, and I know which problems you pace for and which ones you sit very still for. I know you leave cabinet doors open because your brain has already moved to the next thing. I know you put Lily's drawings in your desk drawer instead of throwing them out. He held her gaze. I know you. I'm not a stranger who's about to misread a situation. She was very still. I'm not saying anything tonight, he said, because tonight is not the right time, and I'm not going to do something important badly. He looked at the table, then back at her. But I'm also not going to pretend I've been thinking about that lease in Millbrook without it costing me something. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said finally. Okay. She got up and got a glass of water and stood at the sink for a moment with her back to him, and he didn't say anything else, and eventually she went to bed. He stayed at the table and looked at the space where the family tree had been, and thought about what he'd said and what she'd said, and the 17 days between now and the moment when the contract stopped telling either of them what they were allowed to mean. The inquiry Graves had filed began moving faster than Gerald had anticipated. On the following Monday, Victoria called Ethan from the office at 3 p.m., which she almost never did. He was between jobs, sitting in the truck outside a house in Millbrook, and he picked up on the second ring. The ethics committee voted to proceed, she said. Full investigation. They want to interview you. He sat up straighter. Me? As my spouse. Standard protocol. They'll want to establish the nature of the marriage, whether it's genuine. A pause. Gerald is working on our legal response, but I wanted to tell you before you heard it some other way. When? Next week. The 21st. 2 days before the contract ended. All right, he said. Ethan, you don't have to. I said all right. He said it calmly. Not harshly, just clearly. I'll be there. They'll ask difficult questions. I'll answer them. The questions will be designed to find inconsistencies, to establish that we didn't. She stopped. That we didn't choose each other, he finished. A silence on the line. If you tell the truth, she said carefully, there's a version of events that's complicated to explain. The initial arrangement, Victoria. He looked out the windshield at the ordinary afternoon street, at the ordinary houses where ordinary people were going about ordinary Mondays. If I tell the truth about the last 5 months, there's nothing complicated to explain. She was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I mean that I signed a contract in October, and I've spent 5 months cooking dinner in your kitchen and watching your daughter's school performances. He stopped. Lily's school performances. And sitting in a hallway at midnight because your daughter cried. And I've spent 5 months watching you be a different person at home than you are at work, and figuring out which one is actually you, and the answer is both. He stopped again. So if they want to know whether this is a genuine, if they want to know whether there's something real here, I know what I'd say, and it wouldn't be a lie. The silence on the other end was the kind that means someone is sitting with something they didn't expect. I have a meeting, she said finally. Her voice was different, quieter. I know. Go. Ethan, go, he said. We'll talk tonight. They didn't talk that night. Not about that. Lily had a school event, a small winter concert, 22nd graders with recorders and rehearsed smiles, and they went together and sat together, and Lily performed with the focused intensity of someone who had practiced very hard and was taking the recorder seriously as an instrument, and Victoria sat next to Ethan in the folding chairs of the school gymnasium and laughed at something the child next to Lily did, and Ethan watched her laugh and thought about what he'd said on the phone and what the next 2 days were going to be. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. She did this with the same reliability as she fell asleep on the couch, completely and suddenly, mid-conversation, the words just stopping. Victoria turned to check on her and then turned back to the window, and they drove in the quiet for a while. She practiced that song for 2 weeks, Victoria said, softly enough not to wake Lily. I know. I heard it every morning. She was worried she'd mess up the last part. She didn't. No. A pause. She didn't. The streetlights went past. The night was cold and clear, the kind of December night where everything looks precise and slightly unreal. My father took me to a concert like that when I was 8, Victoria said. My school. I played violin. Very badly, as it turned out. He sat in the same kind of chair, and he looked the same way you look tonight. What way? She glanced at him. Like you weren't anywhere else. He kept his eyes on the road. He worked constantly, she said. I resented it when I was young. But when he was present, he was completely present. That was his particular gift. She looked at her hands. I don't know how to do that. The completely present part. I'm always... She gestured at her own head. In here, managing something. You were present tonight, he said. Was I? You laughed at the kid in the 3rd row. He was playing the wrong song. You noticed the kid in the 3rd row, Ethan said. That's present. She looked at him. In the dark of the car, her face was quiet in a way that it wasn't often quiet. The stillness of someone who has put down something heavy, just for a moment. I'm not good at this, she said. Whatever this is. Neither am I. You're significantly better than me. I've had more practice. He said it without thinking, and then heard what it meant. The reference to Sarah, to grief, to the practice of loving people through hard things. He didn't try to walk it back. Victoria seemed to understand. I know, she said. I know you have. They were quiet the rest of the way home. He carried Lily inside without waking her. Victoria held the doors. They did this with the practiced coordination of people who have done it before, and Lily slept through all of it, her head on his shoulder, her hand loosely fisted in the fabric of his coat. He put her to bed. Victoria stood in the doorway, and he could feel her there the way you feel a presence you've gotten used to, and he tucked Lily in and smoothed the hair from her face and came out to the hallway. Victoria stepped back to give him room. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "I didn't do anything." "You were there." He said it the same way she'd once said I heard her. Simply. As the thing that it was. Her expression did the thing he'd been cataloging all these months, the moving of something to the surface, briefly. She started to say something and then didn't. "Get some sleep," he said. "The committee meeting is in 3 days. You need to be sharp." "I'm always sharp. You're sharp when you've slept. You're terrifying when you haven't." She blinked once. Was that a compliment? Take it how you want. She almost smiled, third catalogued instance of the week. He went to his room. Franklin Graves was not a stupid man. This was the thing that made him genuinely dangerous, and the thing that Ethan had understood from the first conversation at the investor dinner. Stupid people telegraph. Smart people wait. Graves had been waiting since October, building the inquiry the way you build a legal case, not with one argument, but with accumulated pressure, each piece individually innocuous, collectively damning. By the time the ethics committee was convened on Tuesday the 21st, he had a financial forensics analyst, 2 board witnesses willing to testify about the speed of the marriage and its timing relative to the will, and a 30-page document that the committee had received the previous Friday. Gerald briefed Ethan the morning of the meeting in the lobby of the Sterling Capitol building on the 43rd floor of a glass tower in Midtown that Ethan had never had reason to be in before. Gerald was tense in the way of lawyers who are confident in their argument and nervous about their client's ability to deliver it. "The committee has 3 members," Gerald said. "Elaine Cho, Robert Fisk, and Patricia Navarro. Navarro is neutral. Fisk has been sympathetic to Graves historically. Cho is fair-minded. The goal is not to win Fisk. It's to be so unambiguously credible that Navarro has no choice but to rule in our favor." "What questions will they ask?" Ethan said. "They'll try to establish the timeline. When you met, when the relationship developed, why the marriage happened when it did. They'll probe for inconsistency. Dates, details, anything that doesn't track." Gerald looked at him. "The most important thing is to be specific. Vague answers look rehearsed. Specific answers look like memory." "What if the specific answers are complicated?" "Complicated is fine. Inconsistent is not." Victoria was in the building. She'd been in early meetings with her own legal team. Ethan saw her briefly in the hallway outside the conference room where the committee would convene. She was in a dark suit, her hair precisely arranged, the full professional armor assembled. She looked at him, and he looked at her. And for a moment they were just 2 people in a hallway about to walk into a room where they'd have to explain something that had started as a transaction and somewhere along the way became something that didn't fit in the category either of them had prepared for it. "Ready?" she asked. "You?" "I've been in worse rooms," she said. "Probably." They went in. The committee sat at one end of a long conference table. Graves was there too. As the inquiry's originator, he was permitted to observe. He sat against the wall, out of the main arrangement, but his presence filled the room in the way of someone who believes he is about to win something. Ethan sat at the table. Victoria sat beside him. Gerald sat to his left. The committee chair, Elaine Cho, opened with a summary of the inquiry's purpose and the process. Then she asked the first question. "Mr. Walker, can you describe in your own words how your relationship with Ms. Sterling developed?" Ethan looked at her. He'd expected to feel nervous in this room, and he was slightly nervous, but mostly he felt the same clarity he felt before a difficult job, the focus that came from knowing what mattered and ignoring what didn't. "I was hired to handle the packing and cataloging of Richard Sterling's estate," he said. "Victoria was there during the job. We talked." He paused. "The first time it was about her father's Princeton diploma. I was on a ladder, and she startled me, and I almost dropped it." He heard Graves shift in his chair. "She was there for a lot of the job. When you're packing someone's belongings, you see how they handle it, whether they're present or they're just supervising. She was present. She cared about every item. He looked at the committee. I paid attention because that's information I use for the job. You handle things differently when you understand what they mean to someone. And after the job? She called me. We met at a diner in Millbrook. She was direct, she usually is, but about the fact that her father's will had a provision and that she was running out of time to meet it. She asked if I'd be willing to formalize a relationship. He said it plainly, without decoration. I thought about it. I have a daughter. It was a significant decision. I agreed. Robert Fisk leaned forward. You agreed very quickly for a man who claims this was a significant decision. I didn't agree quickly, Ethan said. She told me about the clause during the estate job. I called her that night from my daughter's kitchen while my daughter was asleep upstairs, and I was looking at a drawing she'd made on the refrigerator. He paused. I agreed because of my daughter, because I wanted her life to be more secure than it was, and because Victoria was honest about what she needed. I'd rather deal with someone honest than someone who makes the ask sound like something it isn't. And the payments? Fisk said. I received payment, Ethan said. Yes. Which would suggest a transactional arrangement rather than a genuine marriage. I received payment and I fell in love with her. He said it with the same flatness he'd have used saying the disposal needs replacing. Those two things happened in the same 6 months. One doesn't cancel out the other. The room was very quiet. Graves, against the wall, had gone still. Ethan didn't look at Victoria. He kept his eyes on the committee. Can you give the committee a specific example, Elaine Cho said carefully, of a moment in the marriage that you would characterize as genuine? He thought about this for only a moment. My daughter has a recurring dream about her mother, who died 2 years ago, he said. She woke up from it in the middle of the night about 2 months into us living together. I went to her room. When I came out, Victoria was in the hallway. She'd heard Lily and gotten up. She hadn't knocked on our door or tried to intervene. She just stayed close in case she was needed. He paused. She wasn't required to do that. She wasn't performing it for anyone. It was the middle of the night and nobody was watching. He stopped. She got up. He finally looked at Victoria. She was looking at him, and her face was doing something he'd never cataloged before because he'd never seen it. Something open and unguarded and slightly undone, and the control was still there but only barely, and she looked like herself, the actual self, the one that was most visible when she thought nobody was watching. People do a lot of things when nobody's watching, he said to the committee, looking back at them. That's usually when you find out who they are. Elaine Cho wrote something down. Patricia Navarro was looking at her own notes, but her expression had shifted. Fisk asked 2 more questions. Gerald answered one of them. Ethan answered the other. Graves said nothing throughout, which Ethan took as a sign that the room had not gone the way Graves had expected. When it was over, Gerald steered them into an anteroom while the committee deliberated. It took 45 minutes. The ruling came back in Victoria's favor. The inquiry was closed. Insufficient evidence to substantiate the allegation of bad faith. The marriage was recognized as valid for the purposes of the will's provisions. Graves left without speaking. Gerald shook hands. He looked at Ethan with an expression that had no name but contained a great deal of professional respect and a moderate amount of personal bewilderment. That was, he started. Don't, Victoria said. Gerald closed his mouth, collected his folder, left. They were alone in the anteroom. A small room, aggressively beige, with a window that looked onto the air shaft between buildings. Not a room designed for important moments. Victoria was looking at the window. You said you fell in love with me, she said. Yes. In a conference room, to an ethics committee. It seemed like the right time. She turned from the window. She looked at him with something that might have been fury or might have been the exact opposite of fury. It was the particular expression of someone whose carefully maintained distance has just been collapsed by a single sentence in a beige anteroom in front of 3 strangers. You can't just... She stopped. Can't just what? Say that. Like that. She pressed her lips together. In a formal committee proceeding. Would you have preferred I said it somewhere else first? I would have preferred... She stopped again. Her jaw was tight. I built a clause specifically... The clause doesn't apply anymore. The contract ends in 2 days. That's not... She looked at the ceiling briefly, a gesture he recognized as her trying to organize something that wasn't organizing. That's not what the clause was about. I know what the clause was about, he said. It was about protecting yourself. She looked at him sharply. I know, he said again, without any edge to it. I understand why you needed it. You had a transaction, and you needed it to stay a transaction. And I'm aware that I just stood in a conference room and announced to 3 people that it stopped being a transaction at some point. And I'm aware that's complicated. He was looking at her directly. But you were in that room too. And I know what your face looked like when I talked about the hallway. So, her face did it again. That particular thing, the surface-to-surface movement of something real. 2 days, she said. 2 days, he agreed. She straightened. She was still herself. Still the woman who ran board meetings and handled graves and read 3 documents simultaneously without losing the thread of any of them. That didn't go away. It wasn't supposed to go away. I have a board briefing in 20 minutes, she said. I know. We'll talk tonight. I know that too. She started toward the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back. And for a moment she just looked at him. A look that had none of the professional calculation and all of the person, the whole person, the woman who got up at midnight and put drawings in her desk drawer and said, I understand pieces in a hallway outside a sick child's room. The hallway, she said. That night. She paused. I didn't do it because the contract required anything. I want to be clear about that. I know, he said. I knew then. Something in her face settled, like a question that's been answered. She went to her meeting. Ethan stood in the beige anteroom and looked at the air shaft outside the window and breathed out, long and slow, the breath of a man who has said the true thing and is now standing in the space after saying it, waiting to see what it becomes. 2 days. The contract would end on Thursday. He thought about the crayon figure in the branches of a family tree. He thought about the sound of a real laugh in an almost empty museum hallway. He thought about the particular quality of a house where a child is asleep upstairs, where 2 people are sitting with something they've been not saying, and the way silence changes when it stops being empty and starts being full. He thought about all the things that had happened in the last 5 months in the margins of an arrangement that was supposed to be a transaction. Then he picked up his jacket and went to get his daughter from school, because Lily had a science test tomorrow and he'd promised to help her study, and because some things don't stop for the story they're inside of. Outside, December was doing what December does, pressing everything close and cold and making the dark come early. 18 days had become 2. He drove toward his daughter and toward Thursday and toward whatever happened after the contract ended, and the real thing, whatever the real thing was, got a chance to speak for itself. They didn't talk that night. Not because they avoided each other. They didn't. They had dinner, the 3 of them, and Lily dominated the conversation with an elaborate account of what had happened at recess involving a disputed rule about Foursquare and a boy named Dominic, who apparently cheated consistently and without remorse. Ethan listened and asked the right questions, and Victoria listened too, with the focused attention she gave to things that mattered to her, and nobody said anything about the committee room or the anteroom or what had been said in either of them. After dinner, Lily had her science review. Ethan sat with her at the kitchen table going through the material, weather systems, the water cycle, the difference between cumulus and stratus clouds. Lily knew more of it than she thought she did. This was usually the case. She second-guessed herself before she checked, which was a habit he'd been trying gently to correct for 2 years with moderate success. Victoria worked in her office. The door was open, which it sometimes was and sometimes wasn't. On the nights it was open, Ethan understood this as a kind of available tile, not an invitation, just the door not being closed. He put Lily to bed at 8:30, came downstairs. Victoria's office door was still open, and he stood in the hallway for a moment and then went to the kitchen and made tea the way he usually did and brought a second cup and set it in the doorway. She looked up. "Leave it there," she said. "I'm almost done." He left it and went and sat in the living room with a book he didn't read. 15 minutes later, she came out, cup in hand, and sat in the chair across from him and tucked her feet up underneath her in a way that had become familiar over 5 months, but still sometimes struck him as belonging to a different, more unguarded version of her. "Long day," he said. "Yes." She drank her tea. Gerald called after the board briefing. The committee's written ruling will be formalized by Friday. Graves has been officially notified. How did he take it? Silently, which is how he takes things he intends to revisit. She wrapped both hands around the cup. He won't stop, but he's out of moves for now, and the New Year restructure will shift the board composition enough that his base of support gets thinner. She paused. The foundation is protected. The charitable programs stay intact. That was the whole point. It was. My father's point. Originally. She looked at the cup. I've been angry at him for the clause. For months I was angry, because it felt like control, like he didn't trust me to manage the company on my own terms. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking lately that maybe he just knew me, that I'd worked so hard at the corporation for so long that I'd stopped remembering there was anything outside of it. She didn't look up. That maybe what he was giving me wasn't a constraint. Maybe it was an exit. Ethan set his book down. An exit from what? From being only this. She gestured at herself. The blazer she still had on, the folder she'd brought out from the office, the professional architecture of herself. He knew I'd built a very efficient life. He might have guessed that efficient and good weren't the same thing. A pause. I'm not sure I would have guessed that on my own. The house was quiet. Outside, December pressed against the windows. Victoria, he said. I know. She looked up finally. I know what you said in that room today. I haven't forgotten it. I've been thinking about it since you said it. And? She looked at him with the expression he'd come to understand was her most honest one. The one that appeared when she'd run out of other options and was left with only the true thing. And I'm afraid, she said. That's my actual answer. I'm afraid. And I'm not very practiced at saying that, so I'm saying it plainly because I've found that's the only way I know how to say hard things. What are you afraid of? She was quiet for a moment, organizing it. That this is what it looks like inside the 6 months, and what it looks like outside is different. That the structure of the arrangement, the shared house, the routine, the necessity of each other, that those things created a feeling that doesn't survive without them. She held his gaze. I have not historically been good at the parts of relationships that require someone to choose you when they don't have to, when there's no contract, when there's no clause. Your mother, he said. She didn't flinch, but something in her shoulders shifted. She chose not to, she said. My father chose work, which is a different thing but has similar results in a child's understanding. She paused. I'm aware that I'm telling you my psychological history at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, and that this is not especially romantic. I didn't ask for romantic, he said. I asked what you were afraid of. You're very literal. I find it helps. She almost smiled, and then didn't quite, because the conversation was too close to the edge of something for that. I'm afraid you'll leave on Thursday because the contract ends, and that will be the truth of it. That when there's no structure requiring your presence, you'll find that Millbrook is your actual life, and this was an interlude, a good one, but an interlude. She looked at the cup. And I'm afraid that if I tell you that, you'll stay out of something that looks like love, but is actually guilt, or pity, or the habit of taking care of things that need taking care of. Ethan was quiet for a moment. This was the most she'd said to him at once that wasn't about the company, or the board, or the practical logistics of their arrangement, and he understood the cost of it. Understood it the way he understood the cost of lifting something heavy, the visible effort. Can I say something? He said. Yes. The morning I signed the contract, I was sitting in a diner on Route 22 looking at a woman who had handed me a folder with an emotional non-entanglement clause in it. He set his tea down. I thought, this is a transaction. I thought, I will be careful, and I will be present, and I will do this for Lily, and at the end of 6 months I'll walk away with enough to change her life, and this will have been a business arrangement that I completed professionally. He paused. I was wrong by the 2nd month. I was significantly wrong by the 3rd. By the 4th, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't wrong. He looked at her. That's not the arc of a man who's going to leave on Thursday because the contract ends. She looked at him. I'm also not staying out of guilt or pity, he said. I am occasionally moved by guilt and not above pity, but that's not what this is. I know what this is. I've had enough loss to know the difference between being drawn to someone because they need you and being drawn to someone because of who they actually are. He leaned forward slightly. You're difficult, Victoria. You're impatient, and you leave every cabinet door in this house open, and you send emails about things that could be conversations, and you've had exactly one vulnerable moment per month this whole time, like you're rationing them. You're not easy. He held her gaze. I'm not interested in easy. I haven't been interested in easy since I was 22. She looked at him for a long time. That's not a very romantic declaration, she said. Her voice was careful and something else, something that wasn't careful at all. I told you I didn't go for romantic. You called me difficult. You are difficult. Most people don't lead with that. Most people are trying to sell you something, he said. I'm not selling anything. She was still for a moment. Then, quietly, I know. She set her cup on the side table. I know you're not. She looked at her hands. When you described the hallway, in the committee room today, when you described coming out of Lily's room and finding me there, I had to work very hard to hold my expression together. I noticed. Did you? I've been reading your face for 5 months. I know all your versions. She looked up. All of them? Most of them. He paused. I'm still working on a few. Something happened in her face right then. Something that wasn't the almost smile or the controlled composure or the CEO reading the room expression. Something younger than any of those and less defended, and real in the way that catches you off guard because you weren't expecting the actual thing. I don't want you to leave, she said. That's the simple version. I've been building to it all evening, and that's the sentence. She looked at him steadily. I don't want you and Lily to leave, and I know the clause ends Thursday, he said. I know, but I need you to understand. She stopped. Tried again. I need you to understand that this isn't about the company or the foundation or any reason that involves a structure or an incentive. Those are done. Graves is handled. The will is satisfied. There's nothing left in the arrangement that requires you. She pressed her lips together. I'm telling you I don't want you to go because I don't want you to go. Not because I need you, because I want you here. That's the difference I've never been able to trust before in my own feelings, whether there was a difference. Whether I was capable of wanting something just because it was good rather than because it was useful. She paused. You're the first person in a long time who has made me feel like there might be a difference. Ethan looked at her for a moment. The living room was quiet, and upstairs Lily was asleep, and the house was doing what this house had been doing for 5 months, being the setting for something that had refused to stay in its assigned category. I'm not leaving Thursday, he said. Ethan, I'm not leaving Thursday, he said again. Not because of the contract or against it, because I don't want to leave. And I think we've both been standing 6 inches from saying that for a month, and I'd like to stop standing there. She looked at him. But, he said. She stilled. I need something from you first, he said, before Thursday, before we decide what comes after. What? I need you to say it when there's nothing requiring you to, not in this room, not tonight where we've built up to it. I need a day, one day, of just normal, of the arrangement officially ended, and no pressure and no committee and no Graves and no clause. I need to know that after all of that is gone, you still... He paused. I need to know you can choose this without a reason. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a fair ask, she said. I thought so. You want a day. Thursday, he said. The contract ends Thursday. Give me Friday. Something that might have been relief moved through her expression. Not the relief of someone who got what they wanted, but the relief of someone who has been seen clearly and found it less frightening than expected. Friday, she said. Yeah. She picked her tea back up. He picked up his book. They sat in the living room for another hour, not talking about anything that mattered. And when she went to bed, she paused in the doorway and said, Good night, in a voice that meant something more than good night. And he said it back, and the house settled around them like it was used to this. Wednesday was the last full day of the contract. Ethan spent the morning in Millbrook, not for a job, but to sign the paperwork on the rental he'd been putting off. The lease was month to month, which was all he'd been willing to commit to, and the landlord had looked at him oddly when he'd explained he needed something available starting in February maybe, or possibly not at all, but he'd like to have it available. He signed the lease anyway. He wasn't sure why, except that having options felt important, having a door to walk through if he needed one. He drove back to Princeton in the early afternoon and found the house quiet. Victoria at work, Lily at school, Donna doing something in the back of the house. He stood in the kitchen for a while with the keys in his hand and looked at the space that had, without his permission, become familiar. The cabinet doors were all open. He went around and closed them. He picked Lily up at 3. On the drive home, she was quiet in an unusual way. Not the post-test quiet or the tired quiet, but the thinking quiet, where she was working through something and hadn't decided to surface it yet. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes." A pause. "Is Victoria going to be at dinner?" "Probably. She usually is." "Is she going to be at dinner next week?" He looked at the road. "Why are you asking?" "Because Sophie's mom said she heard we were moving." Lily said it with the careful neutrality of someone who knows this is important information and isn't sure how to hold it. Sophie heard from Dominic, who heard from his sister, who's in 3rd grade. The information chain of second graders was something Ethan had underestimated. "I haven't told anyone we were moving," he said. "I know. I said Sophie's mom was wrong." Lily looked out the window. "Was she wrong?" He drove for a moment before answering. "I don't know yet." Lily absorbed this. "I don't want to move," she said. Not as a demand, just as information, the way she sometimes laid things out plainly, having gotten it from him. "I know, Bug. I like my school here. I like my room. I like the bathtub." She paused. "I like Victoria." "I know." "Do you like Victoria?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was watching him with her mother's eyes, patient and direct. "Yes," he said. "I do." "Then why would we move?" "Because sometimes liking someone isn't enough to solve all the other parts of the situation." Lily considered this with a seriousness that suggested she found it inadequate but was willing to table it. "Okay," she said, and then, "I'm going to tell her I want to stay." "Lily." "She should know," Lily said simply. He didn't have a good argument against that. They got home. Victoria wasn't back yet. Lily did homework with the efficiency of a child who has decided the homework is standing between her and something important finished in 40 minutes, and then went to find Victoria the moment her car was heard in the driveway. Ethan was in the kitchen when he heard them in the entryway. Lily's voice, and then Victoria's, and then Lily again. He stayed in the kitchen. After a few minutes, Victoria came in alone. She looked at him with an expression he'd never cataloged before because it was new. Something simultaneously cracked open and held together. "She told me she wants to stay," Victoria said. "I heard. She also told me that Dominic is a cheater at Foursquare and that I should know this in case I ever meet him." A pause. "I told her I would keep it in mind." "What else did she say?" Victoria set her bag down on the chair. She looked at him steadily. "She said, and I want to be accurate here because I'm still processing it, she said that our family isn't done yet, and she doesn't think we should stop in the middle." Ethan was quiet. "She's 7, Victoria said. "She's wise," he said. "She gets it from somewhere." She looked at him. "I spent the entire drive home thinking about Friday, about what you asked." She put her hands on the back of the kitchen chair. "And I think I already know. I think I knew before tonight. I've known for a while, which is the thing that's been frightening me, because knowing and being sure are different things for me, and I needed them to be the same before I said anything." "Are they the same now?" She took a breath, released it. "Yes," she said. "They're the same now." He crossed the kitchen. He didn't close the distance all the way, left a foot between them, because the foot was important, because he'd meant what he said about not doing important things badly. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she agreed. "But—" She met his eyes. "I want you to know that I would say this on any day. Thursday or Friday or 3 months from now. It's not the moment or the deadline or anything structural. I want you to know that." "I do know that." Good. She held his gaze. Good. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at them, at the foot of distance, at whatever was happening in the space between them, and then looked at the refrigerator. Is there a snack? She said. Apples, Ethan said without turning around. Abstract apples? Victoria made a sound that was more laugh than anything else, and Ethan turned to get the apples, and the kitchen went back to being a kitchen with 3 people in it and the ordinary business of an ordinary Wednesday evening. The contract ended at midnight on Thursday. Ethan knew this technically. He'd read the document enough times to know the specific language, but there was no moment of ceremony. Midnight came and went, and he was asleep, and Lily was asleep, and somewhere down the hall Victoria was presumably asleep, and the only thing that changed was the calendar. He woke at 6:15 on Friday the 23rd of December, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window in the December dark morning, watching the light begin its slow business of arriving. He didn't feel different. He hadn't expected to. The contract ending didn't change the last 5 months. It didn't change what he'd said in a beige anteroom on Tuesday, or what Victoria had said in the living room on Wednesday, or what Lily had said in the entryway about a family that wasn't done yet. What it changed was what came next. That was all. And that was everything. Victoria came down at 7. She was in jeans and a sweater, no blazer, no work armor. She'd been leaving it off more on weekends for the past 2 months, and today was Friday, and also the first day after the end of an agreement that had stopped governing either of them from the inside sometime around the 4th month. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Coffee?" he said. "Please." He poured her a cup. She sat at the kitchen table, not at the island, not standing at the counter, but at the table, in the chair that had become her chair the way things become yours when you've sat in them long enough. He sat across from her. "So," she said. "So." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "The contract is over." "Yes." "As of 12 hours ago." "Technically midnight, but approximately." She looked at the table for a moment. "I have something I want to say." "Okay?" She looked up. "I want to say it correctly, so I'm going to take a minute to get it right." She looked at the cup, then back at him. "I came into this arrangement with a very clear idea of what I was doing. I was solving a problem. I'm good at solving problems. It's the primary thing I'm good at. I identified a gap, found a solution, structured the terms. Efficient." She paused. "And then I moved a man and his daughter into my house, and we started living. Actually, living, not performing living. And I didn't account for that because I thought I'd controlled the variables. I hadn't accounted for what it actually feels like when someone knows where you keep the ibuprofen and makes you sit down for dinner even when you have 47 emails and closes all the cabinet doors without being asked." He looked at her. "I hadn't accounted for Lily," she said. Her voice went somewhere quieter. "I did not expect to love her. I didn't expect to lie awake some nights thinking about what she needs and whether she's okay and whether I'm giving her enough of whatever it is she needs from me." She pressed her lips together. "I am not a person who expected to love a child who isn't mine." "She thinks she's yours," he said. "I know." Victoria's voice had something in it that was not quite steady. "And that terrifies me and also feels more important than most things I've been paid to care about for the last 8 years. The morning light was doing its thing, coming through the east window, making the kitchen the color of itself. "I love you," Victoria said. She said it the way she said hard things, plainly, without armor, looking at him. "I'm not saying that because it's Friday and you asked for a day without structure. I'm saying it because it's true, and it's been true for longer than is comfortable to admit, and I'm tired of being comfortable." She held his gaze. "I love your daughter, who drew me into her family tree with a crayon, and argued with me about abstract apples, and told me yesterday that our family isn't done yet. And I love the man who closed all my cabinet doors and made me sit down for dinner, and came to an ethics committee and said he fell in love with me like it was the simplest fact in the room." She paused. "So that's what I have. That's the true version, without the contract and without the clause and without anything that requires it." Ethan sat with that for a moment. He'd asked for this day. He'd asked for the thing without the structure, the choice without the reason. and she'd given it to him. And it looked exactly like this. A woman in a sweater at a kitchen table in the December morning, saying the true thing with her hands around a coffee cup and nothing protecting her. "I know," he said. "You know. I've been watching you work up to that for 2 weeks." He said it gently. "I've been watching you get there." She looked at him with an expression that was briefly, genuinely exasperated. "You could have helped. You needed to get there yourself." "That's—" She stopped. "That's probably accurate." She looked at the table. "This is not a thing I'm good at. Being seen doing the actual work of getting somewhere." "You're doing fine." "I'm a disaster." "You're honest," he said. That's better than fine." She looked up. "I love you too," he said. "I've loved you since at least the 4th month, probably earlier. I love that you're difficult and that you send emails instead of having conversations and that you stayed up in the hallway for a child who needed someone to be there." He held her gaze. "I love who you are when nobody's watching, which is the best version of a person to love." Victoria Sterling, who had presented to boardrooms and faced down graves and stood in front of an ethics committee without her voice shaking, sat at the kitchen table and pressed her fingers briefly to her eyes and breathed. And when she looked at him again, her eyes were bright in a way that she clearly had opinions about. "I'm not crying," she said. "I know. I don't cry in kitchens. Of course not. I'm just—" She stopped. A breath. "This is a lot." "Yeah," he said. "It is." She pulled herself back together with the efficiency of someone who has practiced composure but was doing it now as something she chose rather than something she required. She straightened. She looked at him with clear eyes. "So what happens now?" she said. "Now we figure it out," he said. "Slowly, correctly, not as a contract." "Slowly," she repeated. "You've been moving fast your whole life," he said. "I've got a lease on a month-to-month place in Millbrook that I'm not going to use, and a company that Marcus has been running competently for 2 months, and a daughter who has decided the matter is settled." He looked at her. "We don't have to rush anything. We have time." She looked at him. "I don't know how to do slow." "I know. I'll help." "That's going to be tremendously irritating." "Probably," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then, with the matter-of-factness of someone who has made a decision and moved to implementation, "You should call the Millbrook landlord." "Already planning to." "And Lily needs to know Lily already knows. She's known longer than we have." He stood up and took both their cups to the counter and refilled them. "She told you the family wasn't done yet. She wasn't asking a question." Victoria was quiet for a moment. He heard the chair move, and then she was standing next to him at the counter, not touching, just close. The proximity of people who have stopped needing distance to feel safe. "I want to do this right," she said. "Not fast. Right." "Me too." "That means—" She paused. "It means taking time. Building something that isn't built on a clause or a crisis." She said it carefully, the way she said things she meant. "I've had enough structures that required falling apart before the real thing could start. I'd like to try a different order." "What order?" "Real first," she said. "Then permanent. Then whatever comes after permanent." He looked at her. "That's a good order." "I thought so." Upstairs they heard Lily's door, footsteps on the floorboards. She always hit the creaky one on the second landing, never remembering it was there until it announced her. Then the padding of feet on stairs. Lily came into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair comprehensively disrupted by sleep, holding Gerald the stuffed elephant by one ear. She looked at them, both at the counter, both with coffee, both looking at her, and she did the quick, unself-conscious assessment of a child who has become attuned to adult atmospheres. "Did you talk?" she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Did you fix it?" Victoria looked at him. He looked at Victoria. She had an expression that was entirely, unguardedly new. Something open and still slightly overwhelmed and real, in the specific way of someone standing in the first morning of something they hadn't known they were waiting for. "We're working on it," he said. Lily considered this. "Is working on it good or bad?" "Good," Victoria said. "It's good." Lily accepted this with the decisive completeness with which she accepted things she'd already decided were true. She went to the refrigerator, opened it, examined its contents with the gravity of someone with important morning business, and extracted the orange juice. "I want pancakes," she announced. "I'll make pancakes," Ethan said. "Can Victoria help?" Victoria, who had once described heating dinner as equivalent to cooking, looked at Lily with the particular expression she used when Lily asked things that were complicated but clear. "I can try," she said. "You always burn the edges," Lily said. "That's true. I'll tell you when to flip them." "All right." Lily poured her juice with careful concentration and then climbed up into her chair and set Gerald on the table facing the stove so he could observe. The kitchen filled with the ordinary noise of a morning. The pan, the batter, the low argument about when the bubbles meant it was time, the smell of something going slightly wrong on the edges and being rescued. Victoria flipped too early once and too late once and got the third right on Lily's instruction, and she looked at the successful pancake with an expression of genuine satisfaction that Ethan found, for reasons he couldn't have articulated, more affecting than most things he'd seen her do in the last 6 months. "Good," Lily said with professional authority. "Thank you," Victoria said seriously. Outside, December was doing its December thing, which in Princeton meant gray sky and cold that had opinions about itself, and the particular quiet of a Friday morning before the last weekend before Christmas. Inside the kitchen, there were pancakes and orange juice and a stuffed elephant named Gerald presiding over the proceedings. Nothing was resolved in the larger sense. There was still a month-to-month lease in Millbrook that needed canceling. There were still conversations ahead, real ones, slow ones, the kind that happen over months rather than in decisive moments. There was still the practical architecture of what they were actually building together, and the question of how you construct something real out of something that had started with an expiration date. None of that was done, but the morning was what it was, and the 3 people in the kitchen were who they were. None of them easy, none of them without damage, all of them sitting in the first day of something that had stopped being an arrangement somewhere around the 3rd month, and had been refusing to say so until it could say it without anything requiring it. Ethan ate his pancakes. Lily ate hers and some of Ethan's. Victoria ate 2 complete pancakes, seated, without her phone, which was categorically unusual, and she looked out the window at the December morning and didn't appear to be anywhere else. After breakfast, while Lily was washing up, she'd taken this on with her characteristic decisiveness, informing them that she was in charge of the low dishes. Victoria stood next to Ethan at the counter with her coffee and said quietly, "I called my father's foundation director last week about expanding the youth arts program." "Yeah?" "He wants to pilot it in Millbrook, among other areas." She looked at her cup. "There's a community center there. I drove past it once when I was picking Lily up from a job you were running." He looked at her. I'm not building a case," she said. "I'm just saying that I've been thinking about what things look like outside the 6 months for longer than this week." She met his eyes. "I've been thinking about it since November, since the Sunday when she fell asleep between us and you said you weren't sure what to do with something that wasn't getting easier." "I remember." "I know you do." She looked at her coffee. "I don't have a plan. That's different for me. I usually have a plan." "How does it feel?" She considered this. "Terrifying," she said, "and also," she paused, "also like the first time in a long time that I'm not running the variables, that I'm just in the thing, without calculating the exit. That's what it's supposed to feel like." "Is it always this uncomfortable?" "Pretty much," he said. "Fantastic." She finished her coffee, looked at the December morning. "I'm going to need you to be patient with me." "I'm a mover," he said. "I have professionally moved people's most breakable things through impossible spaces. I have infinite patience." She looked at him. "That metaphor is doing a lot of work. It's doing exactly the right amount." She almost said something else and then didn't because Lily came back from the sink with wet hands and a question about whether they could go look at Christmas lights tonight since it was Friday, and she'd been asking for 2 weeks, and the conversation moved, the way conversations do in houses with 7-year-olds, into the immediate and the practical and the next thing. Ethan said yes to the Christmas lights. Victoria said she'd drive. Lily went to get dressed. The kitchen went quiet again, the post-breakfast quiet of a house that had fed itself and was settling. Ethan started on the dishes. Victoria picked up a dish towel and stood next to him without being asked and dried what he washed, and they did this without discussion. The way people do things they've started to know without thinking. The cabinet doors were still closed. Somewhere upstairs, Lily was singing to herself. Some combination of a recorder song from the school concert and something she'd invented in between, the unself-conscious music of a child who doesn't know she's being heard. It moved through the ceiling of the old house like weather. Ethan listened to it and washed a plate and said nothing. Victoria dried the plate and put it away and said nothing. The morning moved forward. That was enough for now. The Christmas lights were on Maple Street, 4 blocks from the Princeton house, where someone with strong opinions and apparently unlimited extension cords had covered every tree, railing, and roofline in a spectacle that Lily described as the most serious lights I've ever seen. They walked the block twice. Lily held both their hands, Ethan's on the left, Victoria's on the right, and swung between them periodically in the way she'd been doing since she was 4, when Sarah used to do the same route with her, the 3 of them making a small human bridge along whatever sidewalk they were on. Ethan felt it and said nothing, and Victoria felt it too. He could tell by the way she didn't say anything either, and sometimes the most important things in a life are the ones nobody names out loud because naming them might make them smaller. They stood at the end of the street and looked back at the whole lit-up stretch of it. "I want to live on this street," Lily said. "The rent is probably very high," Victoria said. "You have money." "Lily," Ethan said. "It's true," Lily said. "She told me." "I did not," Victoria started. "You said you had enough for a lot of things when I asked why our house was so big." Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. She had the particular expression of someone who has been outmaneuvered by a 7-year-old and is reassessing their position. "Let's walk back," Ethan said. They walked back. Lily talked about the lights, and then about Christmas, and then about whether reindeer were real animals or made-up ones, and Victoria told her that reindeer were in fact real. They were called caribou in North America. And Lily processed this with the serious attention she gave to information that reorganized something she'd previously understood. "So the flying part is made up," Lily concluded. "The flying part is traditionally symbolic," Victoria said. "What does symbolic mean?" "It means the story is about something true, even if the specific details aren't literally accurate." Lily thought about this for most of a block. Like how Daddy says Mommy is still with us even though she's not actually here. The sidewalk kept going. The cold kept being cold. "Yes," Victoria said. Her voice was steady. "Exactly like that." Lily nodded, satisfied, and moved on to whether they could get hot chocolate. And the night continued, and none of the 3 of them said anything about what had just passed between them on a sidewalk in December. But it passed, and it was there. And it was one of those moments that becomes a fixed point in a family's history, the ones that aren't remembered with ceremony, but somehow never leave. January arrived the way January does after December, which is to say, without any of December's charity about the cold. It announced itself with a water pipe that froze in the east wall of the house, and a board meeting that went 4 hours over schedule, and Lily getting a head cold that turned her into a small, extremely opinionated invalid for the better part of a week. This was the first month of what Ethan had started thinking of, without having decided on the language, as the real thing. No contract, no clause, no arrangement governing what they were to each other, just the ordinary difficulty of 2 people who had said the true thing and were now living inside the consequences of it, which were also ordinary and also difficult and also, surprisingly often, very good. He canceled the Millbrook lease on January 3rd. The landlord had been unsurprised, which made Ethan wonder if he'd known something Ethan hadn't. He called Marcus that afternoon and told him the company's situation wasn't changing, that he'd be back to full schedule in the new year, but that his address was staying in Princeton for the foreseeable future. Marcus said, "Yeah, I figured," with the composure of someone who had figured 3 months ago and had been waiting for the confirmation. "Pete called it in November," Marcus added. "Of course he did. He said any man who sounds like he's thinking about something he's not saying for 2 months straight is a man who's already made a decision and hasn't told himself yet. Pete should write a book." He says his knees hurt too much to sit at a desk that long. Ethan laughed. It felt like the most uncomplicated laugh he'd had in a while, and he noted that without making too much of it. The things that had been complicated remained complicated. That was the honest accounting of January, February, and into March. Two people rebuilding their relationship without the scaffolding of the arrangement that had accidentally built it in the first place. It turned out that the contract, for all its problems, had provided structure that real life didn't automatically replace. There were days when Victoria reverted to the CEO version of herself, not because she was performing, but because that version was the most practiced, the most automatic, and the work of being different took energy she didn't always have. There were days when Ethan went quiet, in the way of people who are carrying something they haven't figured out how to put down. They had arguments, not screaming arguments. Neither of them was built for screaming, but the careful, pressurized kind where two people who are both accustomed to being right about things find themselves wrong in front of each other and have to work out what to do with that. The first real one happened in February over something so logistically specific that the specifics barely mattered, which is usually how it goes with arguments that are actually about something else. Victoria had scheduled an event, a foundation board dinner, on a Friday evening that Ethan had marked as Lily's school play. She'd missed it on her calendar, not maliciously, just the way things get missed when your calendar has 47 items on it and you're running 3 overlapping timelines. "I'll send someone to record it," she said when Ethan pointed out the conflict. "That's not the point," he said. "She'll have the video, see? She needs you there, Victoria, not a video." Victoria looked at him. "I have 32 people attending this dinner. The foundation director is flying in from DC. I can't cancel." "I'm not asking you to cancel anything," he said. "I'm telling you that Lily is going to look out from that stage and want to see your face in the audience, and a video doesn't do that. I'll make it up to her. I'll take her somewhere. We'll do something special." "You can't make up a moment after it's gone," he said. "You know that. You know that better than most people." The conversation stopped. Victoria stood in the kitchen with the expression of someone who has been handed a truth they weren't ready for, which is one of the least comfortable things a person can be handed. He'd invoked, without stating it, her father. The decades of work that had seemed like the right priority until it was too late to reprioritize. He'd invoked it because it was relevant and because he was honest, and he stood with the discomfort of having been honest in a way that landed harder than he'd planned. "That wasn't fair," she said. Her voice was even, but it was work. "It was accurate," he said. "I'm sorry it wasn't fair." She turned and went to her office and closed the door. Not a slam, a click. The same click Lily used. He stood in the kitchen and didn't follow, because she needed 10 minutes and he knew that about her. And after 10 minutes, she came back out and sat at the kitchen table and said, "I'll rearrange the dinner, push it to Saturday." "You don't have to, I want to." She looked at him. "You were right. The way you said it was a lot. But you were right." She looked at the table. "I've spent a long time choosing the thing with the clearest deadline. The foundation dinner has a date. Lily's play has a date, but one of those dates can move and one can't." She paused. "My father moved the wrong things for 30 years. I don't want to do that." He sat down across from her. "I shouldn't have said it the way I said it." "No, but I needed to hear it the way you said it." She looked at him. "That's one of the harder things about this. Being with someone who'll say the actual thing." "Do you want me to stop?" She held his gaze. "No," she said. "Don't stop." They sat with the residue of the argument for a while. The particular silence after two people have said difficult things, and neither is wrong, and neither is entirely right, and they're both still there. Which is its own kind of answer. Lily's play was on Thursday. Victoria was in the third row. When Lily came out in her costume, she was playing a tree with all the authority of someone who had decided that playing a tree was an important artistic opportunity. She scanned the audience the way children do, the automatic radar sweep for their people. And when she found Victoria's face, she did the small wave that was also a beam, the full-face smile of a child who has been looked for and found. Victoria waved back. Ethan watched this from the fourth row and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't try to name. Spring came. The year turned in the way years do. Not all at once, but incrementally, the light changing before the temperature, the trees deciding to try again. The Princeton house got a new water pipe in the east wall and a garbage disposal that actually worked, and a small raised bed that Lily had campaigned for since February, and that Ethan had built on a Saturday in March, while Victoria read case files on the porch and offered structural opinions that were occasionally useful and frequently off base. "You're holding the level wrong," Ethan said. "I'm reading, not holding the level." "You pointed at it." "I was gesturing in its general direction." "From the porch." "I have thoughts about drainage," she said. "Don't you want to hear my thoughts about drainage?" "Not particularly," she told him anyway. One of the drainage thoughts turned out to be correct, which she noted. He noted that she'd noted it. Lily planted tomatoes, which she called my tomatoes, with a possessiveness that made clear they were not family tomatoes. She also planted what she described as flower seeds, the kind that come back every year, and tended both with an attention that suggested she had decided this was her garden in the same way she had decided the bathtub was her bathtub, and Victoria's drawing desk was also kind of mine for art. The garden was one thing, the company was another. Walker & Sons had its best first quarter in 6 years, which Marcus reported with the satisfied energy of someone who had run the operation competently in his boss's relative absence and wanted this acknowledged. Ethan acknowledged it and also gave him a raise and also had the conversation about bringing Marcus in as a partner, not immediately, but in the architecture of what the company was going to be in 3 to 5 years. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said. I want to be clear about that. But I also want the company to be something that doesn't depend entirely on me being present for everything. Marcus looked at him steadily. "What changed?" "I have more to be present for," Ethan said. "That's all." Marcus nodded slowly. "The raise is good," he said. "The partner thing, let me think about it." "Take your time." "Pete's going to say he saw this coming." "Pete sees everything coming. He's going to be extremely smug about it." "He's earned it," Ethan said. Victoria's company stabilized in ways that had been in motion since October, but required the full arc of the year to complete. The board restructure she'd been planning since the fall went through in March. 2 new members, both more aligned with the Foundation's mission, both appointed through a process that Graves had tried to slow and failed to stop. By April, his position on the board had become what Victoria described to Ethan as ornamental. By May, he announced his retirement in a press release that used the language of dignified departure and was believed by approximately no one who had been paying attention. "How do you feel about it?" Ethan asked when she told him. "Relieved," she said, "and a little empty, which surprised me." "Why empty?" She thought about it. "Because he was the opposition. He was the thing I was defending against. When you've been braced against something for long enough, it becomes part of how you hold yourself." She paused. "I have to figure out what the posture looks like now." "Softer," he said. "The posture can be softer now." She looked at him with a wry expression. "That's very optimistic." "You're literally standing less rigidly than you were in October." She straightened slightly. He noticed. She noticed him notice. "Stop observing me," she said. "I'm not going to stop observing you. It's unsettling. You do it to me constantly." "That's different. I'm evaluating." "I know," he said. "So am I." She made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh, the one that had first appeared at the investor dinner and that he'd cataloged since then so many times. The catalog had become simply her, just part of what she sounded like. The Foundation's arts program launched in Millbrook in April. It was small, 15 kids, a rented space at the community center, an art teacher named Priya, who had grown up 2 towns over and came recommended by 3 different people. Victoria attended the launch not as a representative of the Foundation, but simply as someone who wanted to see it happen. She sat in the back of the community center while Priya introduced the program to the kids and their parents, and she watched with her hands in her lap and didn't take any calls. Ethan stood next to her. He'd picked her up from the Princeton house and driven them both to Millbrook in the truck, which she'd climbed into without comment, which a year ago would have been unimaginable. "This is what it was for," she said quietly, watching a kid in the front row pick up a pencil for what appeared to be the first time with any kind of intention. "The Foundation?" "All of it." She meant something bigger than the sentence. He understood. Yeah, he said. She looked at him sideways. Don't get sentimental. I'm not. You're making the face. I don't have a face. You have a face, she said. It's the one where you're thinking something important and deciding not to say it. I was going to say the kid in the front row reminds me of Lily. She looked at the kid, looked back at him. He's a 7-year-old boy with different hair and different everything. He's holding the pencil the way she holds it, Ethan said. Tight, like it might escape. Victoria looked again. Something moved in her expression. Yes, she said. He is. Lily, meanwhile, had started 3rd grade and had complicated opinions about it. The teacher was fine, but assigned too much reading. Her best friend Sophia had moved up to the advanced math group, which Lily had mixed feelings about. Proud of Sophia, annoyed at math for being the reason Sophia was less available at lunch. The tomatoes had produced 6 actual tomatoes, which she'd reported as a triumph and eaten 2 of immediately, standing in the garden, not waiting. She'd also started asking questions. Not the family tree questions from before. Those felt resolved in the wordless way that children resolve things when the reality around them shifts into the shape they'd already drawn in crayon. The new questions were more specific, the ones that arrived at inconvenient times and deserved actual answers. In October, almost exactly a year after Ethan had signed a contract at a diner on Route 22, Lily asked the question at breakfast on a Tuesday while eating cereal and apparently thinking about something entirely unrelated and then pivoting with no warning. Are you and Victoria going to get married? She said. Ethan looked at his coffee. For real, Lily added. Not the other kind. He looked up. She was eating her cereal and watching him with the patient directness she'd had since she was 4. She knew something. She always knew something. What other kind? He said carefully. Lily gave him a look that was so similar to a look Sarah used to give him that it stopped his breath for a second. Daddy, she said, with the weariness of someone who has been waiting for a slow person to catch up. I'm 8. You're 7. I'll be 8 in March. It's basically the same. He set his coffee down. Where's this coming from? Sophie's mom asked me if Victoria was my stepmom, and I didn't know what to say. She ate a spoonful of cereal. I want to know what to say? He was quiet for a moment. What did you want to say? Lily thought about this seriously. I wanted to say she's my family, she said, but I didn't know if that was right. That's right, he said. That's completely right. But is she going to be my stepmom? He looked at his daughter, 7, nearly 8, holding her spoon and waiting for information with the calm of someone who has already decided she's fine with any answer but would like to have it. I don't know yet, he said. That's an honest answer. I'd like her to be. We're figuring out the timing. What's there to figure out? Grown-up things, and Lily sighed. You always say that. Because it keeps being true. She ate the rest of her cereal, then, I think you should just ask her. Yeah? Yes, she likes you. You like her. That's usually how it works. She stood up and put her bowl in the sink. Sophie's mom said timing is everything, but Sophie's mom also said the sofa cushions were definitely beige and they were clearly gray, so. She went to get her backpack. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a long moment after she left the room. The cabinet doors were all closed. The new disposal hummed quietly under the sink. Outside the kitchen window, the October garden had gone to its end-of-season self. Tomatoes done, the perennial flowers Lily had planted bowed over, brown at the edges, waiting for the cycle to bring them back. He thought about what Lily had said, which was, stripped of the 7-year-old delivery, not wrong. He thought about a year, about what a year looked like when you mapped it from where he was now back to where he'd been. The diner, the contract, the folder with the clause, the man who had signed believing he was making a transaction. He thought about what the intervening year had actually been, the hallway at midnight, the kitchen in the 7 a.m. light, the car after the gala, the committee room, the Christmas lights, the February argument and what came after it, the garden, the almost laughs that had become real laughs, the cabinet doors. The cabinet doors which had been closed this morning by someone other than him. He noticed this specifically. Had been noticing it for 3 months, every morning, without saying anything. Victoria had started closing them. Not always, not perfectly. Some mornings 3 were open and she'd get 2 of them. But the effort was there. The awareness was there. The slow work of changing a habit because someone else found it easier if she did. That was love, actually. Not the declaration in the beige anteroom, not the kitchen table in December. It was the cabinet doors. The everyday effort of trying to be a slightly better version of yourself for the person who asked you to. Not because they demanded it, but because they were worth the trouble of it. He thought about his father, the moving company, the estate sales, the way his father had spent 30 years handling other people's valuable things with careful hands. You pick up certain ideas about value when you do that work, about what's actually fragile and what only looks like it is, about the difference between things that are broken and things that need a different kind of handling. His father would have liked Victoria, he decided. Not immediately. His father had been suspicious of ease, and Victoria projected ease even when she was working hard. But eventually, after he'd seen her with Lily, after he'd watched her close the cabinet doors, he called Marcus and told him he was taking Friday off. "Everything okay?" Marcus said. "Everything's fine," Ethan said. "I have something to do." He spent Thursday evening with Lily, who had been given the complete picture, or as much of a picture as a 7-year-old required, which was primarily the information that something was happening that she would like, and that she should not say anything to Victoria about it, which Lily received with the solemn gravity of someone being entrusted with a significant secret. "I'm not going to say anything," Lily said. "I'm very good at secrets." "You told me about Sophia's math group the day you found out." "That wasn't a secret. That was news." She made the distinction clearly. "There's a difference." He let her stay up an extra 30 minutes on the grounds that she'd helped him think something through, which she accepted as adequate reasoning. On Friday morning, Victoria had a half day. She'd been cutting back on the Friday schedules since March, which had required actual effort and had been ongoing evidence of the posture she was working on. She came home at noon to find the house quiet, Lily at school, Ethan in the kitchen. He'd made lunch. This was not unusual. What was unusual was the absence of his phone on the counter and the quality of the quiet, which Victoria read in approximately 7 seconds because she'd spent a year learning to read this house and this man and this particular quality of stillness. "What's happening?" she said. "Lunch," he said. "Ethan, sit down." She sat. He sat across from her, which he did every day, and which was also not unusual, except that he sat with nothing in his hands and nothing on the table between them, which was unusual, because Ethan always had something in his hands. A cup, a phone, a dish, a tool. Having nothing in his hands was a specific state. She looked at him. "I've been thinking about what Lily asked me on Tuesday," he said. Victoria was very still. "What did she ask you?" "She asked if we were going to get married." He held her gaze. "For real," she said, "not the other kind." Something moved through Victoria's expression. "She knows." "She's known for a while." "She says she's basically 8. "She's 7. "March." "It's essentially the same, apparently." Victoria looked at him. She had the December morning expression, the open, unguarded one, the one he'd come to think of as the truest face, the one that appeared when she'd stopped managing herself and was just present. "I've been thinking about it too," she said carefully, "about timing. Lily says timing is a thing Sophie's mom believes in. She's less convinced." "Sophie's mom is—" She stopped. "What are you asking me?" "I'm not asking you anything yet," he said. "I'm telling you something first." She waited. "A year ago I was in a diner signing a document that was supposed to be a transaction," he said. "I had a daughter who cried for someone who wasn't there, and a company that was barely more than a truck, and a dream my father had before I was born. I had $50 a month going into a college fund and a landlord who was going to raise the rent in February." He looked at her. "I thought I was solving a practical problem. I thought I was choosing security over principle, which was maybe the most practical thing I'd ever done, and also felt like the thing I'd feel worst about later." He paused. "I was wrong about most of that." "Which part were you wrong about?" Her voice was quiet. "The transaction part, the practical problem part, the feeling worst about it later part." He looked at her hands on the table. I was wrong about what I was choosing. I thought I was choosing money. I was choosing you. I just didn't know it yet. He looked up. And you were choosing me for your own reasons, and neither of us was ready to say that out loud for a long time. Victoria's hands were still on the table. We've said it now, she said. We have. He reached into his pocket. He put a small thing on the table between them. Not large, not the kind of thing that requires a ceremony or a bent knee or the constructed drama of a performance. Just a ring, simple, a detail he'd chosen with care. I'm not asking for a transaction, he said. I'm not asking for a contract. I'm asking if you want to do this for real. Build something that doesn't have an expiration date. Be Lily's family, officially, legally, in a way she can tell Sophie's mom without having to figure out what words to use. He held her gaze. Be mine, in the way that doesn't have a clause. Victoria looked at the ring. She looked at him. Her eyes were doing the thing they'd done at the kitchen table in December. The bright thing that she had opinions about. I'm difficult, she said. I know. I leave the cabinet doors open. Less than you used to. She looked at him. You noticed. I notice everything about you. I've been noticing everything about you for a year. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to be bad at things, she said. I'm going to choose work when I shouldn't. I'm going to send emails when I should have conversations. I'm going to eat. Victoria, he said. She stopped. I'm not asking you to be different, he said. I'm asking you to be you. The one who shows up in the hallway at midnight. The one who closes cabinet doors when she remembers. The one who puts Lily's drawings in her desk because she can't make herself throw them out. He looked at her steadily. The one who said real first, then permanent, then whatever comes after permanent. I'm asking for all of it. The difficult parts, too. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, October was doing what October does in New Jersey, pushing color into everything before taking it away, the last generosity before the cold. Yes, she said. She said it simply, without ceremony, without the careful architecture of a board presentation. Just the word, clean and clear, the way she said things when she meant them entirely. He slid the ring across the table, and she picked it up and put it on and looked at it on her hand with the expression of someone checking whether something fits and finding that it does, in more than the technical sense. She looked up. We should tell Lily, she said. She already knows something's happening. She said she wouldn't say anything. She said she was good at secrets. He stood up. She's going to be impossible about this. She's going to be... Victoria stood too. She's going to be so pleased with herself. She had opinions about the timing, Ethan said. She was right. Victoria looked at him. She was smiling, a real one, fully arrived, the kind that reorganized her whole face. He'd seen this one before. He planned to see it for a long time. She gets that from somewhere, Victoria said. Her mother, Ethan said. He meant Sarah, and Victoria understood that he meant Sarah, and neither of them looked away because one of the things they'd figured out in the last year was that Sarah wasn't a wound that needed protecting anymore. She was part of the story. She was the woman in Lily's family tree, on the refrigerator drawing, yellow-haired and permanent, and not required to be gone in order for other things to be real. Love doesn't replace. That was what the year had taught him. If it had taught him anything, it accumulates. It adds. A person can carry grief and gratitude in the same hands, and the carrying doesn't cancel either one out. I'll pick Lily up from school, Victoria said. She'll know the second she sees your face. Good. She picked up her keys, paused at the kitchen doorway. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you, she said, for the Friday in December, for making me wait for a day when there was nothing requiring it. You've said thank you a lot, he said. I'll probably keep saying it. I know, he said. I've stopped arguing about it. She went to get their daughter. He stood in the kitchen and listened to the house, the quality of its quiet, the particular architecture of sound that a place accumulates when people have been living in it. The creak of the second stair, the hum of the replaced disposal, the way the east window rattled slightly in wind that came from a specific direction, which he'd learned by October and which Victoria had learned by March. He closed 2 cabinet doors that were open, left a third because it was hers to close. He thought about what it meant to build something from unlikely materials. He'd been a mover his whole working life. He knew what it looked like when people packed up the old version and started moving toward the new one. He'd always been on the outside of that, the professional witness to other people's transitions, the careful handler of everything they needed to bring with them. This time, he was inside it. This time, the boxes were his. And none of the things worth keeping were fragile in the ways he'd been afraid they were. He started thinking about dinner. Lily came through the door at 3:45, going slightly faster than walking, which was her speed when something important was happening. She looked at his face. She looked at Victoria's hand. She made the sound that was not quite a word but was entirely itself, the sound of a child who has been right about something for a very long time and has just received confirmation. "I knew it," she said. "You did," Ethan agreed. "I told you to just ask her." She said this to Ethan with the satisfaction of completed advice. "You did." "And you did." "I did." She turned to Victoria. "You said yes." "I said yes," Victoria confirmed. Lily looked at the ring. She looked at Victoria's face. She looked at Ethan's face. She was doing her calculation, the rapid assessment that had been running since she was 4 years old, the one that checked whether the people she loved were okay, whether the room was safe, whether the thing being told to her was true. Whatever she found satisfied it. She crossed the kitchen and wrapped her arms around Victoria's waist, which she could reach without stretching now in a way she hadn't been able to a year ago, and she held on with the same total commitment with which she held on to things that mattered. Victoria put both arms around her and held on back. Ethan watched them and said nothing. He thought about a crayon drawing on a refrigerator. Family. The spelling imperfect, the feeling exactly right. He thought about a little girl who had understood something before either of the adults in her life were ready to admit it, who had drawn a dark-haired figure into the branches of her family tree, not as a wish, but as a fact she'd already decided was true. Children see things. They see them before the adults do sometimes, because they haven't yet learned to protect themselves from the possibility of being seen in return. There was a lesson in that somewhere, something about the cost of being too careful with yourself for too long, and about what happens when you finally put the careful down and let the thing you've been protecting become the thing you're actually living. He'd learned it from a 6-year-old mostly. He was going to spend a long time being grateful for that. They had dinner that evening. Victoria burned the edges of the garlic bread, and Lily told her so with the honesty of someone who considers this a service. Ethan fixed it in the pan and said nothing. The dinner was imperfect in the ordinary ways of dinners in real households. Someone spilled, something was slightly overcooked, the conversation went 6 directions at once, and perfect in the only way that actually counted. Later, after Lily was asleep, they sat in the living room, not talking about the company or the board or the foundation, just in the room together in the way they'd learned over a year of evenings, the particular comfort of people who have chosen each other in the full knowledge of what the other one is, which is the only choosing that actually sticks. "My father would have liked this," Victoria said. She said it to no one specific, looking at the window. "Not at first. He would have had opinions about the moving truck." "Most people have opinions about the moving truck," Ethan said. "Eventually, he would have come around." She paused. He had good judgment about people. It just took him a while to get out of his own way long enough to use it. "Runs in the family," Ethan said. She looked at him. "I say that with admiration," he said. "You say that," she said, "because you're tactful when you want to be." "You're welcome." She was quiet for a moment. "I think he would have seen what Lily saw," she said. "What she drew in the family tree, before either of us could say it." She looked at the window. "I think he would have said, 'That's what it looks like. That's the one that's real.'" "Was he usually right about those things?" "About most things," she said. "Eventually." A pause. "He left me a clause in a will that I was furious about for 6 weeks, and it led me to a diner in Millbrook, and then to a moving truck, and a 6-year-old, and a year that I wouldn't—" She stopped. "I wouldn't have written it this way. I wouldn't have chosen this path. I would have been too efficient for it." "Efficiency is overrated," Ethan said. "I'm beginning to agree with you." "That's a significant concession." "Don't push it," she said. He looked at her in the low light of the room, the ring on her hand, The sweater she wore on evenings she wasn't performing for anyone. The hair that had come mostly loose from wherever it had been pinned this morning. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for a year, the slow accumulation of attention that becomes knowing, and he thought, this is the thing. This specific thing, right here, is the thing you couldn't have planned for and couldn't have avoided and wouldn't trade for any of the easier versions. Some things only arrive by the longest road. He'd moved furniture through impossible spaces his whole working life. He understood now that the same principle applied to everything worth carrying, that getting it through the door sometimes required angles you wouldn't have predicted, help you didn't know you needed, and a willingness to put down the thing you thought you were protecting long enough to see what you were actually protecting all along. Outside, October kept being October. The trees kept doing what they do. Inside the house on the quiet street in Princeton, a man and a woman sat in a room that had become, by the slow and imperfect and entirely real work of a year, theirs. Down the hall, a little girl slept. In the morning, she would wake up and come downstairs and find them there, and the day would start the same way every good day starts. Ordinary, imperfect, and full of whatever comes next. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.